Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece Straw Hat Family by Hotspot the 626th. As the crew travels through the Grand Line, something happens that not even the crew could prepare for. A baby? What are the Straw Hats going to do? Abbas, I don't own anything. Adios.
The Straw Hats caught? Who will answer the tears of the children? It was now morning and finally, it was the day of Luffy and Nami's wedding. Most of the crew got up early to help decorate the deck of the Sunny for the occasion. Of course, Mika was the last one up and immediately wanted breakfast. Sanji was happy enough to give the girl, and most of the crew as they too became hungry, some breakfast. Pancakes. When they were done, the adults got back to work, which was a problem for the only child aboard the pirate ship. Despite knowing how important this celebration was to everyone, Mika was completely bored. She tried to get her usual playmates, her father, Usopp, Chopper, and occasionally Brook, to play with her, but they had been occupied by chores from her own mother. She was definitely starting to hate the idea of weddings now. So, she did what any child does when surrounded by boring stuff: cause trouble. In the kitchen, this needs more sweet, Mika stated as she quickly grabbed a bag of sugar. She then proceeded to spill half the contents into the pot of soup. Shouted Sanji quickly. He then grabbed the bag, though it was already too late. He checked the soup and found it bad, and it was clearly evident on his face. So, Mika spoke, noticing her uncle's reaction yet still innocent. Too much? Yes. On the deck, hey, Lil, sis, could you hand me the hammer? Frankie called out as he held two pieces of wood together. He and Usopp were currently working a wedding canopy for Zoro to stand under. Though as they worked, Mika had disappeared. Mika, said Frankie, using one hand to lift his sunglasses to look for the little girl. In doing so, the structural integrity of the canopy was beginning to falter. Frankie, shouted Usopp, panicking. Then, the canopy fell apart, collapsing on top of Frankie and Usopp, though not really hurting or crushing them. As the two men laid beneath the wood, finally the little girl in question appeared. She was wearing a cape made from a sheet and running around with a hammer in her hand. Super Mika is here too, Mika said in a heroic tone before she noticed her uncle's situation. She frowned confused and tilted her head confused. What happened? Hey guys, we're done with the, shouted Luffy as he, Chopper, and Brook walked up. They all stopped when they saw Mika in front of the Usopp and Frankie collapsed underneath some wood. Luffy then asked, what's going on? Usopp and Frankie just released a groan in reply, with her mother and aunt. What do you think about this outfit? Nami asked to Robin in Nami and Luffy's room. She was holding up one of her old outfits from adventures past. The one she was currently holding up was her Alabasta outfit during her fight with Miss Doublefinger. Robin shook her head as she sat on the bed. I think personally, your previous outfit would do better, she said, referring to her 5th Thriller Bark outfit, a maroon dress. She then had a thought. Whatever happened to the wedding dress you were forced to wear? Nami frowned with displeasure. I got rid of it. I rather choose my own wedding dress. Mama, Mika called out as she laid upside down on the bed, you should wear a swimsuit, so then we can go swimming. Nami sighed but smiled amusedly. That's a nice idea, baby girl, but I rather not tempt Sanji or make daddy potentially nervous. Mika pouted, defeated. She then stood up on the bed and began jumping on it. Let's go swimming, let's go. Since she too was on the bed, Robin quickly stopped the girl from continuing her bouncing. Using her devil fruit powers, she grew hands around Mika and stopped her. That will be enough of that, she said with a smile. Mika pouted again in defeat. No fair, Nami sighed. She thought to herself, what was she going to do with her impatient little girl? Or with just Zoro? Mika pulled on Zoro's shirt as she shouted at the swordsman. Play with me, Uncle Zoro. Leave me alone, shouted Zoro as he stubbornly remained seated in the crow's nest. You're not even doing what you're supposed to be doing. I don't care, I'm gonna tell Mom. Zoro's eye twitched. Fine then, he stated gruffly as he grabbed a sheet of paper, you can help me learn my lines. Mike immediately sent silent. She then turned around and walked towards the exit. See, shouted Zoro, frustrated, you didn't even care? As the hour neared for the wedding, Mika had taken a seat and was pouting with annoyance. As Usopp finished off placing some decoration, he looked around to see what there was to do. He quickly spotted Mika sitting in her chair. He felt a little sorry for the girl he considered a niece. So, when he noticed he was short of a few decoration, he came up with an idea. He then quickly approached the girl, smiling. Hey, Mika. Mika stopped pouting and looked to see Usopp coming towards her. Yeah? You want to come with me to get some last-minute stuff? Usopp asked, still smiling and giving the girl a wink. Mika tilted his head confused, but then she quickly understood. She smiled and nodded happily. Sure, she said as she stood up. Alright. Hey, guys, Usopp shouted to the crew, me and Mika are going out. We'll be back soon. Yeah, replied many of the crew. Most of them were focused on decorating the Sunny, but but they could at least acknowledge they were leaving. Usopp and Mika headed off for town immediately. The long-nosed sniper wasn't worried about them going into town. Not only was neither he or Mika had a bounty, technically speaking as his bounty was for Sogeking, but also the Marines had moved on to the northern part of the island as they had planned. This would be an easy and quick pickup. After entering town, Usopp led them to the store he needed to go to. It looked like some sort of craft shop. Usopp looked excited while Mika was just curious about the store. Nonetheless, they both went in. The sniper took off immediately knowing what he wanted. Mika on the other hand just looked around as curious kids do. Picking stuff up, touching things, and almost breaking stuff. As she did these, she didn't notice that she was being watched. "Hey!" Mika stopped her wandering and looking when she heard someone speak. "Hey!" She heard the same voice again and began to look around wondering where the voice was coming from. "Over here," the voice said, speaking louder. Mika looked over at an alleyway. She immediately saw the person who was speaking to her. "Oh, it's you, dummy," Mika said, surprised. She recognized the speaker. It was Akio. "Yeah," Akio said, looking annoyed. However, he kept his cool and spoke to the girl politely. "And you're Mika, right?" "Yeah, okay, Mika, do you want to see something cool?" Mika grinned with excitement. Sure, she was then about to follow Akio, but quickly stopped. "Wait, why do you want to show me something cool? You're a dummy." Akio ignored the comment. "Look, for what it's worth, I'm sorry for being mean to you yesterday. So, I thought I'd make up for it by showing you this cool thing I found. Now do you want to come or what?" Mika looked suspiciously at Akio. She then looked around the store trying to find Usopp. Unfortunately, she could not, but that didn't stop her from being curious. "It's not too far away, right?" "Well, a little, but we'll be back before that long-nosed guy notices you're gone." "I don't know," Akio frowned and folded his arms. "Come on, and I thought you were cool," he said before turning around acting displeased. Mika gasped. "I'm cool," turned around. Akio smiled cunningly. His plan was working. He then turned around looking happy. Then, "Come on," he said before grabbing Mika's arm and dragging her into the alleyway. Mika followed the boy very excited. This was the first time someone around her age was taking her to something cool. Sailing on the sea doesn't exactly allow her to be with others her own age. It also doesn't help that her parents were wanted pirates, and if any of the adults knew about it they would take their kids away out of fear. Now, she was about to experiences kids like her experience in their childhood. She was super excited. They took many turns through alleyways and crossed streets. As they ran through town, Mika didn't notice how the town started getting progressively worse both in structure and people. She was just so excited to see the cool thing Akio wanted to show her. "It's in here," Akio said, beckoning Mika to follow him. The young boy was leading the girl into a very broken down building. Mika followed the boy inside. As they went through the building, Mika slowly looked around curious. "Akio, is this the cool thing?" Mika asked, referring to the building. "Of course not. There's broken buildings all over this part of town," Akio said before rolling his eyes in annoyance. "Just keep following me." "Okay," said Mika, grinning excitedly. She continued to follow Akio further in, but she soon lost sight of Akio. Mika became confused. "Akio, over here," Akio shouted from another room. Mika turned and followed Akio's voice into a room. As she walked in, she looked around the small room, but did not see Akio. She immediately became confused. "Huh?" Then, the door slammed closed. Mika turned around shocked. "What?" She ran over to the door and tried to open it, but could not. "It's locked," she shouted, distressed. "Akio, help." "Good work, boy." Mika heard a new voice speak. She couldn't see who was speaking, but she could tell that the one talking was an adult male. And that he didn't sound nice. "Akio?" Mika spoke, confused. "Ah, look at the cute little child." Mika looked up at the door. There seemed to be a small window with bars in the door. Peering into her room was man covered in shadows, but his smirk could be clearly seen. To think, she is the key to the Straw Hat's downfall. "Akio?" Mika shouted, worried. "Ah, she sounds like she misses you, boy," a man said mockingly before laughing. Many more joined in laughing at the boy. "Shut up," said the leader to his men. "Hurry and go get the Marines." "Got it, boss," one man said before taking off. "And you, boy," the leader said to Akio, "go get the Straw Hats." "Why yes, boss," Akio said nervously before taking off quickly. The boss chuckled. "Everything is going as planned, men." He paused as his group gave out a cheer in triumph. He then continued speaking, "And once we have the Straw Hats here and in our trap, and then given to the Marines, we'll finally be able to leave this cruddy part of town forever." "Nah," said Mika defiantly. This took the boss by surprise. He turned around and walked over to the door, peering inside, confused. "What?" "They're gonna kick your ass," Mika said, smirking confidently. Immediately, she covered her mouth, shocked by what she said. Could you please not tell my mom that I cursed?" The boss smirked arrogantly. "Little girl, your mom and her crew won't know a thing." He then began to laugh maniacally. His men soon joined him in laughing. Mika frowned angrily. She didn't like that they were laughing at her family. She began ramming into the door. The door wouldn't budge, but she wouldn't give up. She had to escape before it was too late. Mika, back at the store. Usopp finally bought the items they needed to finish off the wedding. But as he was about to leave, he couldn't find Mika. He found it strange that Mika was nowhere in sight. The girl usually didn't wander off unless Luffy was with her. He hoped she didn't run off and gotten lost again. He then went outside. He looked for her outside, but did not see her. He then shouted out loudly. "Hey, Mika, where'd you run off to?" As Usopp looked around, Akio rushed into view from the alleyway. "Mister," he shouted with panic in his voice, "Mister." "Huh?" Usopp turned around realizing that someone was talking to him. "Oh, it's you. The kid from yesterday." "Am I, Mika?" said Akio exhaustedly. "What, Mika?" said Usopp confused. Quickly, he realized that the boy knew something about Mika. "Wait, do you know where Mika is?" "Why yeah," Akio said, nodding his head quickly. "She got kidnapped by these bad guys." "What?" shouted Usopp, shocked. Some of them looked really strong too. Strong, but they were all really scary. Scary, shouted Usopp. He immediately began shaking in fear. Watching the adult, Akio couldn't help but be surprised. For an adult, he is way too gullible. He thought with a sweat drop forming. Quickly, he got back on task. "We gotta hurry, mister." Hearing the boy, Usopp quickly calmed down. "Alright," he said determinedly. He then crouched down, placing his hands on the boy's shoulder. "You stay here. I'm going to get some help." "Hurry," Akio said worriedly. Usopp then stood up and took off. He was going to get the crew and then they would take Mika back. Akio watched with a smirk. The boss's plan was working perfectly. Once this was all over, he would have his money. Soon, "Mom, let me out." Back at the hideout of the boss, Mika was yelling and banging on door. She had been doing so for a while. For the men, her racket was starting to get annoying. "Let me out," shouted Mika again. She then began banging on the door repeatedly with seemingly no end. That had been enough. One of the boss's men approached the door. "Hey, shut up, you little twerp," he shouted before kicking the door hard. Mika felt the kick, though it only surprised her. She did not like it. "Ah!" she screamed loudly before running around in her room. As this scream was extra loud, all the men nearby quickly covered their ears trying to lessen the sound. Yet, for all it's worth, the men could still hear much of it. Many of them even groaned in annoyance. "Someone, make her stop," shouted one of the men in agony. As everyone did nothing, Mika continued her temper tantrum. The girl had a lot of breath in her lungs. She soon began intensifying her tantrum by hitting and kicking around the room. As she kicked the back wall of the room, a small part of the corner collapsed. Mika then immediately stopped everything as she saw the hole in the wall leading outside. "Huh?" said one of the men outside. Despite Mika's screaming, they all heard something else as well. "Did you guys hear something?" Quickly, Mika crawled through the hole. Once outside, she could hear the men shouting. "Shit, she escaped, boss, what are we going to do?" "Don't panic, you idiots," shouted the boss's voice. "You three, chase after her, make sure she doesn't run into the Straw Hats." "Right, boss." Mika gasped afraid. She immediately took off running straight into the forest. Her panicking mind had told her to run, but not which direction to run in. "Hey, there she is," shouted one of the men sent after her. He and two others then followed after her. "They're this way, hurry," shouted Akio back to the group. The Straw Hats ran right behind the boy. Usopp had gotten the crew in record time and was back just as quick. Akio then led the group through town. The townsfolk immediately noticed the large and strange group running through town, and thanks to the yesterday's uproar, they also recognized the group. "It's the Straw Hats," someone called the Marines. The Straw Hats heard the townspeople's shouts, but did not care. "No one is going to stop us," said Sanji serious. "How far is the place, kid?" asked Zoro. "Not too much farther." "Alright," shouted Luffy as he threw his hands in the air with determination. "Let's kick their ass." Akio kept running, though he was beginning to feel nervous. There were a lot more people here with him than he expected, and a lot of them were really weird and scary. He felt like this plan wasn't going to work, but he knew he had no choice. Soon, Akio brought them to the building. It looked completely deserted, which made Akio even more nervous. He said as he began pointing to the building. "They're in there." "Alright everyone," shouted Nami to the group. "Let's get in there and get Mika back." "Yeah," shouted the crew. As everyone charged in, Nami stopped. She looked over at Akio and smiled at him. "Thank you for all your help, Akio." "You always might." A sudden explosion stopped Nami from finishing her sentence. She and Akio looked over at the front of the building which had been blown up. "Yeah," shouted the most of the Straw Hat men energetic. Nami sighed. "Get dangerous." "Yeah, I will," Akio said, surprised, producing a sweat drop. Nami smiled towards the boy, relieved, before joining the crew going inside. Despite agreeing with the woman, Akio stayed. He watched as a fight ensued. He had to wait to get his money. Inside, the Straw Hats were fighting against the bad men that had taken Mika. They were barely a challenge. The Straw Hats barely had to flex their muscles. These bandits or whoever they were seemed more like your average villager. Soon enough, they had run out of men to punch, kick, shock, break, or explode. As the group stood in the middle of the building, they were surrounded by mostly unconscious men. Though luckily, there was still one guy conscious enough to speak. Sanji picked up the one man conscious by his shirt and began shouting at him, "Okay, you punk, where the hell have taken our little princess?" "Okay, I'll talk," shouted the man quickly. He then pointed over to the side and said, "She's in there. We didn't hurt her, honest." Sanji, whether he believed him or not, didn't care as he dropped the man roughly. "I'm a coming Mika," shouted Luffy as he rushed over. "Here we come," shouted Chopper bravely. He and Usopp then charged in without a doubt of fear. The rest of the group followed after, though there seemed to be some concerns. "Is something wrong, Ms. Robin?" asked Brooke, noticing the woman's concerned expression. "No," she said, though still looking concerned, "it just seems too easy." "Too easy?" repeated Brooke. "Yes, like they wanted us to come here." Nami looked back at Robin, now concerned as well. "Why though? They must have known they couldn't beat us." "Could this be a trap?" suggested Brooke. "If it is a trap, it's a poor one," Zoro stated, suspicious. "Mika." Everyone stopped speaking as they caught up with Luffy and the others. The three immature men were looking into the rooms nearby. They seemed to not be having much luck as most of the rooms were empty. "We can't find her," Usopp said to the group, distressed. Nami frowned. "She has to be here somewhere. Keep looking." "There's only one room left we haven't checked," Chopper said as he looked down to one last door. It was a large metal door, and it looked suspicious. "That's gotta be where they're keeping Lil, sis," said Frankie. "Mika," shouted Luffy before running. "Wait, Luffy," shouted Nami as she went after him. "Damn it," Sanji shouted as he and everyone followed after them. "Mika," Luffy shouted again as he approached the door quickly. He then sent a kick to the metal door and it broke immediately. "Am I?" Luffy tried to shout, but he soon found his face being pulled on both sides by Nami and Sanji. "You idiot," shouted Sanji angrily. "What if Mika was behind the door?" shouted Nami, even more furious. "Story," said Luffy while his face was stretched. Robin meanwhile took a look around at the room. "I don't see Mika," she said to the group, looking at the empty room. As she did, she noticed something odd with the room. It may have been that the room was dark, but it looked like the walls were crudely drawn. As she looked at the wall, she saw it move gently like cloth or paper. She gasped as she realized, this is the trap. Suddenly, a cage door dropped down, trapping everyone in. "What?" shouted Usopp, Chopper, and Brooke. Soon after, the walls and ceiling began to drop. Sunlight blinded the group for a second before their eyes adjusted to see how much trouble they were in. No longer were they in a dark room. Now they were outside in a cage surrounded by more men. They all laughed in evil cheer as they had the Straw Hats captured. "We caught them," shouted one of the men. Luffy growled and ran over to the closest cell wall. "Don't think this cage will stop," he said before he touched the bars. "Me-hee." Luffy suddenly lost all his energy and fell to the floor depleted. Usopp gasped. "The cage is Seastone." "That's right," shouted the boss as he stepped forward among his men. "It took all our money to get it, but it'll all be worth it once we turn you bunch in." Nami ran up to the cage. "What have you done with my daughter?" she shouted angrily. The boss smirked. "So, she's your daughter, cat burglar," he said, amused. "I never would have expected you to be the parent type. And at such young age too. I have to say, your body still looks good." Nami didn't reply. She simply frowned back at the man. "Between you and me," the boss said as he stepped forward towards Nami, "I'd be willing to let you out for, you know." Suddenly, there came a kick to the Seastone cage. The boss jumped back scared as Sanji had been the one to try and attack him. "You piece of shit," said Sanji angrily, "don't you dare talk to Nami like that." Luffy was reacting as well. Though he couldn't speak, the young captain was trying to grab the man. His hand was outstretched but shaking weakly due to the energy being produced by the Seastone. Nami smirked as she looked back at the man smugly. "Sorry, but I'm happily engaged." The boss frowned. "Fine," he shouted as he returned to his men. "Just means we'll have more money." "Where is Mika?" Robin restated firmly. The boss spat out annoyed. "Bah, that little brat took off. Some kid, Nami frowned, but secretly she was relieved. She didn't care that her daughter ran away, she was safe. Now, they just had to figure out how to escape. "Hey, boss," shouted one of the men as he stepped forward. "That kid is here for his pay." The Straw Hats perked up at the mentioning of a kid. The man then moved aside and revealed that the kid was Akio. The pirate group was shocked. "Akio," gasped Nami, stunned. "That rapscallion," Brooke said, surprisingly mad. The boy didn't look at the Straw Hats. He kept looking away from them even as he approached the boss. He then looked up at the shadowed man. "What is it, kid?" said the boss frowning. "You promised me money," Akio said, also frowning. "That I did," the boss said before digging into his pocket. He then pulled out a single stack of bills and tossed it at the kid. Akio quickly caught the bills though fumbled slightly. He looked surprised at the single stack before looking up at the man. "Wait, you promised me twice this." The boss sneered. He then gave the kid a hard kick, sending the boy falling down near the Straw Hat's cage. "Akio!" shouted Nami, surprisingly worried for the boy. "Boy," said the boss as he stepped towards the boy. He then grabbed the boy by his shirt, bringing Akio face to face with his own. "You better learn some respect. I could have not paid you at all, but you did your job, so I'll be nice. Got it, punk?" "Yee," said Akio, pained as he held back his tears of pain. "Yes." "Good," the boss said as he dropped the boy. "Now, get out of here." Immediately, all of the boss's gang began laughing, mocking the boy. Akio did say anything. He just got back up quickly, grabbed his money, and took off as fast as he could away from the group. While barely noticeable, he began shedding his tears as he disappeared into the forest. Nami watched on sadly. She hated to see a child cry, even if it wasn't her own. While she definitely didn't like to be betrayed by one, she just hoped that the boy had a good reason. "I can't believe that kid tricked us," Frankie said with a displeased frown. Usopp and Chopper began dragging Luffy away from the cage. As he did, Usopp frowned as he also had a thing or two to say about the kid. "I knew there was something off with that kid. I mean, Mika didn't even like him, so why would she go play with him? When we get out of here, I'm definitely disciplining that punk," said Sanji, clenching his teeth with anger. Nami sat down next to Luffy, unsure what to say about the situation. Luffy was just the same as laid on the floor, frowning as he stared up at the sky. Neither Robin nor Zoro spoke, as WLY familiar with betrayal and had no concern over it. Brook and Chopper were frowning as they were worried for not only their situation, but for Mika as well. "Do you think Mika is okay?" asked Chopper to the group quietly. Sanji calmed down hearing Chopper. He took out a cigarette and lit it before he replied, "She's probably better off than we are now. But we're still going to get out of here," Luffy said, having recovered his energy, "and we're not going to leave her." Zoro nodded. "Damn right. Quiet in there," shouted the boss as he banged on the cage. He then turned to one of his men, looking concerned. "Is our guy back yet with the Marines?" "No, boss, but he's on his way with them," a man said, replying back. "Damn, what's taking him so long?" The Straw Hats looked at each other worried. They had better figure out some escape plan, because they knew that there was at least one Marine squadron on the island, and there were no pushovers. Mika ran as fast as she could, knowing she was still being pursued. She may not be an adult, but she had raced against some of the best runners in the crew. Sure, she always came in last, she didn't want to be babied, but she had nearly tied with Frankie, probably the slowest of the Straw Hat runners. And he was still pretty quick. Luckily, she was also in the forest. She could easily duck into a bush or climb a tree to lose her pursuers. Unfortunately, there are 3 full-grown men after her, and they weren't letting up. "Hey," said one of the men while running, "don't you think we've chased the girl enough?" "Now that you mention it," said the second man as he stopped. Mika stopped too. She then quickly hid behind a tree. She hoped they had not seen her as she listened on their conversation. "Yeah," said the third man. "I bet the boss and everyone have already caught those Straw Hat pirates. We don't need the brat anymore. Let's hurry back then, I want to see the Marines come to take those pirates away and give us our money," the first man said to the others. The men then turned back quickly as to be sure not to miss the event. With the men gone, Mika let out a breath, but she was far from relieved. She had heard the men, and she slid against the trunk of the tree in despair. She curled up with her head in her arms. It was her way of hiding her tears, feeling completely helpless. What could she do? She can't beat a bunch of bad men like her family could. She didn't have any skills, nor was she stronger than 100 men. How is she going to rescue them? She was going to lose them, and there was nothing she could do. "This way, Marines." Mika looked up, hearing a voice. Though her eyes were slightly watery, she started looking around to see where the voice came. She soon spotted a man, one of the boss's gang members, walking through the forest. She gasped, and quickly crawled around the tree to hide. She then peered out to see what the man was doing out here. The young girl was surprised to find that the man was leading the Marines, and that she also recognized the Marine officers with him. It was Smoker and Tashigi, the former of the two looking very annoyed. And in seeing them, Mika had realized there was something she hadn't tried yet. As he led them through the forest, the man spoke to officers, trying to reassure them. "Just keep following me, sirs," he said, smiling forcefully, "and I'll show you that we have caught the Straw Hats, securely." Smoker scoffed. "We'll see." Tashigi didn't say a thing. She wasn't sure if this man was telling the truth, but any lead on the Straw Hats was welcomed. Smoker shared a similar thought, though he was definitely annoyed with their guide. He could tell that the man before him was anything but a law-abiding citizen, and that he was kissing up to them so he wouldn't arrest him. Not like he could without cause or warrant. Still, if his claim was verified, then it would be a good day. Suddenly, Smoker was brought out of his thoughts when he felt something small hug his leg. He stopped immediately. "Huh?" said the man, noticing the Marine Commodore stop. "Why'd you stop?" "Sir," said Toshigi, looking down at Smoker's leg, surprise. Smoker looked down at his leg. His eyes widened as he found that his leg was grabbed by a little girl. One that looked very familiar to him. "Little girl." "Mika," Toshigi said, concerned. The guy gasped. "The girl?" "Please," Smoker heard the girl speak despite it being slightly muffled. He could feel a small part of his pants become moist. Mika was crying, and from how she sounded, he realized she was scared as well. This was only confirmed his thoughts as Mika looked up at him. Now, her despairing face and sad tears could be clearly seen. "Please, help," Mika cried out pleadingly. Meanwhile, somewhere in town, in a medical clinic. "Please," said Akio pleadingly to a doctor. He held out the stack of bills given to him by the boss towards the doctor. "Take the whole thing, but please, help my mom." The doctor frowned. "I'm sorry, son, but you don't have enough for the medicine." "Please," Akio said more fervently. Seeing that the doctor wasn't going to give him what he wanted, Akio became angry. He dropped the money and snatched a medicine bottle. "Hey!" shouted the doctor, catching the boy in the act. Akio then quickly took off with the bottle. He ran through the clinic and exited outside. He continued running, going down the street. All the while, he was shedding a few tears. As he did, he looked at the unmarked bottle. He hoped beyond hope he had grabbed something to help his mother. He then turned a corner and ran straight into the forest. Last time on One Piece. Straw Hat Family. It was finally the day of Luffy and Nami's wedding. However, they would have to place the ceremony on hold. While Usopp and Mika were in town, Mika was tricked by Akio into being bait for some shady characters. Though she was able to escape, the Straw Hats unfortunately were tricked and captured as well. How will the Straw Hats escape this trap? Will Smoker help Mika? Find out now. We returned to where we last left off for the Straw Hats. Not much had changed for the group. They were still trapped in a cage made of Seastone. The group had started trying to break the cage. At least, the ones that would not be affected by the Seastone. In doing so, certain attacks managed to slip through the bars and attack some of the gang members. Not like they cared. But unfortunately, none of their attacks even scratched the bars. "Come on," shouted Nami, feeling determined. "Keep trying." Sanji launched another powerful kick at the bars. Unfortunately, like always, it barely did anything. "I'm sorry, Nami," he apologized. "I'm trying the best I can." Frankie threw another punch at the bars. Again, they did not even bend. He began growling with annoyance. "This is not super. Lil, sis is still out there alone." "That's why we gotta keep trying," Nami stated. Luffy roared furiously and charged with his fist cocked back. He slammed his fist into the bars with all his strength. Unfortunately, not only did it not work, but Luffy was quickly drained of all his energy as well. With all his energy gone, Luffy slid down onto his face. Quickly, Chopper and Brook pulled Luffy away from the bars. Brook commented to Luffy politely, "Nice try, Mr. Luffy." "Hey," shouted the boss, having finally gotten fed up with the racket. "Enough with the trying to escape shtick. You're never gonna get out." "Shut it," shouted all the Straw Hats together. Their fury fused together, creating an intense aura. The entirety of the boss's gang stepped back frightened. To the boss and all his men, they saw that aura take on the form of a lion. A very angry and furious lion. They were starting to believe that the cage was the only thing keeping them safe at the moment. Now, they hoped the Marines would get here sooner. "Where are those Marines?" whispered the boss to his men. Suddenly, there came a thud and cough from behind the gang. The boss and his members turned around to find the man the boss had beaten, barely conscious, and tied up. The gang members gasped in surprise. Even the Straw Hats went quiet, trying to see what was happening. "There," said the man, speaking weakly with the last bit of his consciousness. "Here." He then fell into unconsciousness. "What?" shouted the boss, confused. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Smoker, and he was all by himself. Everyone gasped in shock. "Smokey," Luffy said, stunned. "What is the meaning of this?" shouted the boss, stepping forward. Smoker frowned. "You all are under arrest," he stated seriously. "What?" shouted the boss, shocked. "On what charges?" "For kidnapping," Smoker said as his hand and arms began turning into white smoke. "Mental abuse of a child and disturbing the peace." "What?" shouted the boss again. "White out," shouted Smoker as the smoke launched out. The boss and his gang were completely helpless as the smoke enveloped them. Many tried to move, thinking that this was just normal smoke, only to find that it was far from normal. No one could move one way or the other, like they were being held in place. "White in," Smoker said calmly. "This move is made up." By Smoker's command, the smoke grabbed the gang members and pulled them towards the center. All the gang members screamed as they crashed into each other, with the boss right in the middle. Instantly, the boss was knocked out, soon followed by all his men. Total and complete victory for Smoker. Because the smoke was an extension of Smoker, a logia-type devil fruit user, It did not or could not enter the cage where the Straw Hats stood in. They heard the screams of the gang members and wondered what Smoker had done to them. Then, surprisingly, a jingling sound was made as something came towards the group. Quickly, Nami caught what was thrown at them. She looked at the object in her hand and gasped. "It's the key, really?" shouted Usopp astonished. Quickly, Nami unlocked the door. Everyone exited out of the cage quickly without causing a cluster at the exit. Immediately, most everyone was relieved to be out and free except the group's main fighters. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. All three of them stood in front of group. Sanji lit a cigarette calmly though also prepared. Zoro was clutching his swords preparing to strike, and Luffy stood in front of all of them looking the most serious. All three looked at the smoke as it cleared away revealing Smoker. The Marine Commodore stared back at the group of pirates as the smoke surrounded the group keeping prying eyes from seeing them. And though the rest of the Straw Hats looked a little worried by their current situation, the monster trio remained focused on Smoker. "Straw Hat," spoke Smoker gruffly. "Yeah," replied Luffy. "If I see that girl again, and she's crying because of your recklessness, I will liberate her from you, is that clear?" Luffy frowned. He stared back at Smoker, his enemy, as he did to him. Though neither spoke, they both seemed to share a sort of hidden conversation. One that could not be said out loud nor acknowledged by the world. Something completely unheard of, yes. Having gotten his answer and was satisfied with it, Smoker turned around and walked away from the group. As he did, the smoke followed him until he and it disappeared into the forest. Meanwhile, most of the Straw Hats looked at Luffy shocked. What did their captain just say? "Luffy," Nami said stunned. "What just?" Luffy turned back to Nami grinning. "Let's go get Mika," he said cheerfully. In the forest, Smoker walked alone heading towards the last place he left his second-in-command and his squad. For obvious reasons, he left them behind. He did not exactly need them anyway. He soon pulled out a transponder snail and made a call. "Tashigi, I'm done," Smoker said speaking into the receiver. "Tell Mika to remain where she is in." "Sir," Tashigi shouted suddenly through the snail surprising the Marine. The snail also conveyed the worry evident in her voice. "What is it?" asked Smoker remaining calm. "She's gone," shouted Tashigi while the snail conveyed her eyes slightly tearing up. "She took off, I don't know where she went." "What?" shouted Smoker. "Mika versus Akio. Fight, fun, forgive start with the same letter, F." In the forest, Akio walked alone clutching the medicine bottle he stole. Not too far away was a small house likely his home. He soon stopped still a distance away from his home. He frowned before he looked at the bottle. He felt a little bad for taking this, and his mother had always told him that stealing was wrong, but he knew his mother could not wait for him to get more money for the medicine legally. So, he put up a fake smile. He would not let his mother know anything about what he did today. He then took his first step forward readying to put on his act. "Got ya." Akio stopped and turned around as he heard a familiar voice speak towards him. He gasped as he saw the last person he expected to see, Mika. Young Mika was not happy to see Akio again, but she was also glad at the same time. She had sat with the Marines waiting for some news from Uncle Smokey. She was still emotional so everyone gave her some needed space. While she waited for Smoker's return, Mika amused herself by looking out into the forest not wanting to really see adults do boring things. It was then that she spotted Akio walking through the woods not too far away. She had first wanted to tell Auntie Tashi, for the sake of getting revenge, but then she had realized, she wanted to go and kick Akio's butt. It was the first time she ever felt like he had to pay for tricking her. So, she snuck off and caught up with Akio. And now, Senj. "Mika," said Akio shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I'm going to kick your butt, you jerk," Mika shouted before charging at Akio. Despite being shorter than the boy, the girl had some strength behind her. She completely knocked Akio down to the ground forcing him to drop the medicine bottle. Akio shocked by the sudden tackle, but he would not let some girl bet him up. The two began to wrestle with each other moving towards the house. Both of them soon slammed into the house just underneath a window before moving away continuing to wrestle. A light turned on inside the home, but neither of the kids noticed, they were too busy fighting. "Meanie!" shouted Mika before biting Akio's arm. "Ouch!" shouted Akio in pain. In retaliation, he began pulling on Mika's hair. He shouted, "Crazy brat. Stupid boy, cootie catcher, snot eater, stupid girl." Children, suddenly, there came a new shout not from the children. It was Yuka, and she looked completely shocked seeing the children fighting. She immediately rushed to stop the kids, but stopped suddenly. She dropped down onto her knees as she began coughing. It was not normal coughing, but hard and painful coughing. As if she would cough out her lungs at any moment. She was even beginning to sweat. It became nearly impossible for her to breathe normally. Hearing the coughing, both children stopped their fighting. "Mom!" shouted Akio beginning to panic. Immediately, he pushed Mika off himself and stood up. He began looking around saying to himself panicking, "The medicine. Where's the medicine?" Mika recovered quickly and looked at the boy angrily. Though she wanted to continue fighting, She heard Yuka's hard coughing and looked over at the woman surprised. "Miss Yuka?" She spoke worried. When the woman could not reply due to coughing, Mika became worried. She stood up and ran over to Akio, who was searching in some bushes. "What are we looking for?" she asked to Akio, completely forgetting their earlier spout. "A medicine bottle," Akio said quickly before continuing his search. "Okay," Mika said after nodding. She took a quick look around from her spot. She stopped as she spotted something underneath a bush opposite them. Quickly, she went to look at the object and discovered the medicine bottle. "I got it," she shouted, holding the bottle up. Akio stopped and looked over at Mika. "Yes," he said, and quickly ran over and took the bottle. He then rushed over to his move and opened to the bottle. Seeing this, Mika gasped in shock. "You can open those lids?" Akio ignored the girl's comment. He continued on as he took out 2 pills and gave them to his mother. "Here, Mom," he said urgently, "I got the medicine you need." Yuka continued to cough, but she also looked at her son, seeing the medicine in his hand. She took the pills and ate them quickly. She chewed for a quick second, pausing just for a moment, and then swallowed the medicine. She began coughing again, but it was not as bad as earlier. Soon, she was able to breathe normally. "Thank you," Yuka breathed out, and in Akio, she finished smiling. Akio smiled relieved. Mika shared the same relieved smile, seeing that the nice lady was okay. Now that she was okay, Yuka began frowning towards the 2 children. "What were you 2 doing?" she said, scolding the 2 children, "wrestling around like that. You both could have gotten seriously hurt." Akio's smile changed to a frown. You see," Mika quickly interrupted as she pointed at Akio and shouted angrily, "because he's a big jerk, jerky jerk, jerk." Akio gasped, looking worried. Hey, Mika," Yuka said, surprised. "Why did you say that?" "Because," Mika shouted angrily as her eyes began to tearing up, "he tricked me into getting captured." "What?" Yuka said, confused. "And then he lied to my family and got them captured by a bunch of big meanies because they wanted to rescue." "What?" Yuka said, now shocked. She then looked over to her son, confused and angry. "Young man, what is the meaning of this? Why would you?" "They were pirates," Akio shouted, nearly in tears himself. "They were the Straw Hat Pirates. They have a huge bounty. I did it so I could get some money for the medicine." "You took my family away," shouted Mika angrily, even louder as her tears began to fall. "I was trying to help my mom get better," Akio shouted back, even louder and just as angry. Both kids were face to face with each other. They were both fuming with anger, ready to attack each other. Immediately, the adult took action. "Stop it, both of you," Yuka quickly intervened as she separated the children before a fight could break out. Now, she was in between both children with her arms stretched out. With neither child making a move, the sickly woman spoke to the young girl first. "Mika," Yuka said calmly, "tell me the truth, is your family pirates?" "Yes," Mika answered as she wiped her tears. "But they didn't do anything wrong, they just wanted to have a marriage celebration thingy. They shouldn't be thrown in jail." "But they're pirates," shouted Akio, "that makes them bad guys." Mika growled and tried to attack Akio, but Yuka stopped her. She then shouted, "They're not bad." "Children, please calm down," Yuka said, though mostly talking to Mika. Eventually, Mika calmed down a little and Yuka could continue talking with them. She then looked over at her son, frowning. She asked, "Akio, did you really buy that medicine?" Akio opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mother was giving him that look, the one which said, "You will tell me the truth because I'll know when you're lying." Akio had absolutely no choice but to tell the truth. "No," he answered honestly before continuing, "there wasn't enough money, so I took the medicine." "Akio," said Yuka, disappointed, "but I left the money," Akio added quickly as some way to save him from disappointing his mother. Yuka remained quiet, though remaining between the children. She thought deeply over their situation. She was not sure what to say to either child. "Mika," a voice echoed through the forest, calling out for the little girl. Immediately, Mika recognized who the voice it was. "Mama," Mika said, hopeful. "Mika, this time, it was another familiar voice." "Daddy." Mika walked away from Yuka and Akio and towards the forest. That time, the call sounded closer. "Mika, Mika, Mika Heim, Lil, Sis, Mika-chan." Mika soon heard the voice of many others. She recognized each one: Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, Frankie, and Brook. They sounded spread out in the forest, but they all sounded close by. Her thoughts of revenge and anger towards Akio soon evaporated into happiness and joy. Her family were free, and looking for her. Without a moment's hesitation, she took off to go find them, leaving Yuka and Akio behind, completely confused. "Mom," Akio said as he tugged his mother's shirt sleeve, "let's get out of here." Yuka shook her head. "No, Akio," she said as she stood up, "we are going to meet with Mika's family, officially." Akio gulped nervously. "Mika," shouted Nami as she walked around the forest searching. The whole crew followed Nami and Chopper, who was trying to follow Mika's scent, through the forest. They all shouted and searched through the forest, keeping an eye out for the little girl. They were all a little worried. They had figured they would run into the Marines soon since Mika had gotten one of them to actually help them. If it were a trap or not, they did not know. They kept together in case they were to be ambushed by the Marines. Nevertheless, they kept searching and calling out for Mika. "Mika!" shouted Luffy. Usopp walked up to Chopper looking optimistic. "Do you still have her scent, Chopper?" "Yeah," Chopper said, keeping his nose to the ground. "It's still fresh." Sanji clenched his teeth in anger, nearly ruining his cigarette. "How far did those bastards chase our poor princess?" he asked rhetorically. "If that Marine didn't take all of them away." "Just focus on finding her, dartboard," Zoro responded gruffly. Surprisingly, Sanji did not respond. He took it with a grain of salt, as it was important to find Mika above a petty rivalry. So, he continued searching. "Mika!" shouted Luffy and Nami together. "Mama!" Nami and everyone stopped as they all heard the call. "Daddy!" The same voice spoke out again, getting closer. They all immediately recognized the voice. "Mika!" shouted Luffy happily. "Daddy!" replied the voice cheerfully. "Mika!" shouted Nami, smiling hopeful. "Mama!" replied the voice again, now closer. "Mika!" shouted the rest of the crew together excitedly. Luffy and Nami immediately took off running forward. It did not take them more than a few feet away as Mika ran right into their view. Parents and child were soon reunited as Mika ran right into Luffy and Nami's embracing huge. "Mama! Daddy!" Mika shouted as she hugged her parents. "Mika!" Luffy and Nami replied back, holding the girl close. "Yes!" shouted Usopp, throwing his fists into the air in cheer. "We found her!" Robin smiled, relieved and happy. "Thank goodness!" "Super!" shouted Frankie as he posed, showing off his cheer. "Yo-ho-ho-ho!" cried out Brooke, overjoyed as she hugged her parents. Mika looked up at them. She was shedding tears and looking worried and panicked. "I'm so sorry," she shouted for her whole family to hear. "I didn't know it was a trap. I'm sorry I had to go to Uncle Smokey for help. I'm—" "Enough, Mika," Nami said as she silenced her little girl, gently stroking her head. "Everything is okay. Don't worry, we're all here and safe." "You did really good, Mika," Luffy said, grinning proudly. The young girl stared up at her parents, surprised. Despite her parents' comforting words, Mika could not help but cry more, though now with joy and relief. She nestled into her parents' chests, keeping them as close as she could get them. She was just so happy to have them, and the rest of the crew, back with her. The crew looked on at the family happily. Even Zoro, who often refrained from being soft, was smiling contently. Suddenly, the crew picked up some sounds of someone coming towards them. Immediately, everyone looked over and prepared to fight should it be a Marine. Much to their surprise, it was a woman, Yuka, dragging her son, Akio, with her. Both groups were surprised to find the other so suddenly. "Hey!" shouted Usopp angrily. "It's that brat!" Akio gasped before hiding behind his mother, afraid. "Wait," Nami said as she stood up, recognizing the woman. "You're—" "Please!" Yuka spoke out loudly before she lowered down onto her knees. She then placed her hands forward in front of her and bowed towards the Straw Hats. She then spoke aloud for them to hear. "Please forgive my son." "Mom, Akio," Yuka said as she momentarily lifted her head up towards her son. She gave the boy a stern look that told him to stop and listen to her. She spoke to him softly. "Please, apologize." The young boy looked conflicted at his mother, but in the end, he listened. Akio bowed down like his mother did. "I'm sorry," he said towards the group. Immediately, Yuka went back, bowing. "Please forgive my son. I know what he did was awful, but he's just a child. He was only doing what he thought was right for me. If he must be punished, please let me take it in his place." None of the Straw Hats spoke. How could they? The woman had practically poured her heart out to protect her only son. All their anger towards the boy had gone away the moment she bowed down towards them. An action that initially shocked the crew. She had come here of her own volition, bringing her son to apologize to a potentially dangerous pirate crew. But this was not some coward's apology. It was a brave mother protecting her child the best way she could. She may be afraid, but would fight them just to protect her son. Usopp began to scratch the back of his head, feeling awkward. "Well," he said before turning around, placing both his hands behind his head, "he is just a kid." Brooke nodded in agreement. "Yes. A child's parent is the only one who may rightly punish their child." Yuka looked up. She wore a look of surprise hearing the group had to say. "I don't know what you thought," Luffy said to Yuka sitting on the ground before rubbing the top of Mika's head affectionately, "but we just wanted to get Mika back." Mika smiled, enjoying the affection her father gave her. When he stopped, she immediately frowned and looked back at Akio. She was still angry at him. "No," she shouted stubbornly and pointed at the boy. "He should be punished, kick his butt." Akio quickly sat up and shouted, "No, Mika," Nami scolded, batting the girl's head lightly. "I understand that you're still mad, but everything is fine now. No one but Ms. Yuka will punish Akio." "But no buts," Nami stated sternly as she crossed her arms. Mika puffed her cheeks up in anger. She then turned away from her mother, crossing her own arms, displeased. "Thank you," Yuka said, smiling towards the pirate group until she began to cough again. It was not as bad as earlier, but it definitely did not sound good. "Mom!" shouted Akio as he stood and rushed over to his mother's side. Immediately, Chopper was concerned. He asked towards the boy, "What's wrong with her?" Akio looked at the reindeer. He immediately overlooked that he was talking to a reindeer and told him, "She's sick." He spoke worried, "That's why I had to trick you all. So, I could buy medicine for her." Chopper nodded before quickly transforming in brainpoint form. He then told the child, "I'm a doctor. May I take a look at her condition?" Akio was a little slow to react at first. The talking and transforming reindeer had nearly thrown him for a loop of excitement and amazement. He however remained mature and spoke up, "You're a doctor?" "Yeah," Mika said, sounding overconfident. "Uncle Chopper can heal anything." "Ah, Mika," Chopper said as he twisted and wiggled with embarrassment. "Just because you say that doesn't mean I like you, jerk." Akio's sweat dropped and looked at the Straw Hat adults. "Is he really a doctor?" "Of course," Robin said, smiling amusedly. Sanji stepped forward, kneeling down towards the sick woman. He extended his hand out, asking with a suave smile, "Will milady allow our doctor to give her a medical exam?" "Wait," shouted Akio as he pulled out the medicine bottle. "We have medicine for her, see?" Chopper peered at the medicine bottle, reading its label. He gasped seeing it. "Wait, you haven't?" "Yes," shouted Yuka suddenly as she took Sanji's hand and stood up quickly. "I would be happy to have your doctor to examine me." She then took the medicine bottle out of Akio's hand gently. She saw Akio's confused expression and quickly responded, "I'm just giving this to Dr. Chopper, sweetie. To make sure he doesn't give me something I'm not already on." Akio frowned, still confused, but nodded. Sanji kept up his smile, though he clearly understood something was off. Nevertheless, he escorted the woman like a gentleman. "This way, madam." Yuka blushed. "Oh, thank you," she said, surprised by the man's suaveness. Akio stood back, unsure if he should follow the group. Then, he felt a small push from his back. He looked up to see Luffy next to him and smiling down at him. Akio could not help but find that strange. "Come on, Akio," Luffy said cheerfully before pushing the boy along with him as they followed the group. Nami glanced back, noticing her fiancé staying behind. She smiled, seeing that Luffy had no real hard feelings toward the boy. Something she wished her daughter would learn. Speaking of, she looked down at said daughter who was holding her hand. She could see that Mika too saw Luffy bring along the boy. And surely enough, she looked very angry and probably jealous too. Straw Hats brought the family of two back to their ship. Chopper immediately took Yuka to the medical bay while Akio sat outside. To say that the boy was nervous being around the people he tricked was an understatement. While the crew spread out all over ship waiting for the results of Chopper's diagnosis, Akio sat on the bench around the main mast. Most of the SWN thing completely indifferent to the nervous boy sitting by himself. Though, one was interested in getting the boy to play. "Hey Akio," shouted Luffy as he ran up to the boy with an excited grin. "You wanna play tag with us?" Akio looked up from the grass. He saw that it was not only Luffy but Usopp, Brook, and Mika as well. While the two adults seemed fine with Akio joining, Mika of course was far from pleased. "No daddy," Mika shouted unhappily, "he's a jerk." Usopp and Brook looked surprised at Mika. "Wow, we're really seeing a whole new side to Mika today," Usopp commented, astonished. "Indeed," Brook said, agreeing. "Come on," Luffy said, actually ignoring his daughter. He then leaned in towards Akio and whispered, "We'll let Mika be it." "Hey," shouted Mika, mad, having clearly hurt her father. Akio was intrigued by the man. Despite having tricked him, he was still being nice to him. He found it weird, but he was bored. "Okay," he said as he slipped off the bench, "I'll play, but I don't mind being it." Luffy grinned. "Okay, Akio's it," he shouted out before running. Akio made a small smile and took off after Luffy. The straw hat wearing man led him towards the others, who in turn took off. While the men playing were happily cheering and shouting, Mika was far from happy having Akio join them. Which made things hard as Akio went straight after her, having seen her as the easy target. Though Mika was not trying at first, seeing the boy coming after her soon made her run faster. To Akio's surprise, she was really fast. Not wanting to be outdone, Akio picked up his pace, chased after her. "You're not going to catch me," shouted Mika, antagonizing. Akio smirked confidently as if accepting a challenge. "Yes, I will," he shouted back before picking up speed. Seeing the boy gaining on her, Mika picked up her own speed. She would not be outdone by a boy and a jerk. As Akio chased after Mika, Luffy sat on the edge of the Thousand Sunny watching curiously. The two kids had passed him twice without Akio noticing him. So, Luffy watched the two chase on with an interested gaze. Kids," Usopp said as he stood on the stairs watching the kids run past him. He shouted out, "There are other players in this game." Frankie took a break tinkering with new hobby, a certain cannon that had yet to be completed, and watched the two kids. He lifted his sunglasses up, impressed with the boy. "Ow," he shouted, "that kid has some super energy." Mika soon reached the slide. Being her only way to escape being it, she immediately took it. As she slid down on her belly, she gave out a cheerful wee before reaching the bottom. Akio stopped at the top of the slide. He was completely surprised to find one on a pirate ship. "You have a slide?" he asked, amazed. After Mika got up, she turned to the boy, hearing his amazed statement. She gave out a huff as she crossed her arms and smirked arrogantly, saying, "Of course we do. The family is the best pirates ever." Several of the Straw Hats snorted, nearly laughing. It was adorable that Mika was trying to show off in front of the newcomer. Not questioning the girl's infallible logic, Akio soon went down the slide. He shouted, "Yahoo!" as he slid down. He landed right next to Mika, laughing joyfully. Mike frowned, seeing the boy was enjoying himself. To rectify this, she restated snobbishly to the boy, "You're still it." Akio stopped laughing, hearing Mika. He frowned before launching up, trying to tag her. Unfortunately, the little girl easily dodged his hand and he fell flat on his face. "Ha ha," said Mika mockingly and smiling. She then took off running. Akio growled and quickly got back up. He then chased after the girl, still determined to make her it. The Straw Hats sat around the deck as they watched the kids play together. It did not even matter to the others playing that they were being ignored. They watched as she took the boy all over the ship, almost like giving him a tour. She showed him the aquarium. "Wow!" shouted Akio as he spun around looking at the amazing aquarium room. He could not get enough of it. "Nah ha!" shouted Mika, sticking her tongue out towards Akio. The boy stopped admiring the room and redirected his attention back at the girl. "I'm gonna get you," he shouted as he took off after her. "The library, I've never seen so many books," Akio said, amazed, looking at the shelves of books. Robin was also in the room. She watched the boy, amused by his reaction to her room. "You're welcome to read one of them if you like," she said generously. "Oh, Akio said bashfully as he looked down. "I, can't read." "Oh," Robin said, surprised. "Yeah, I can read," Mika said, grinning boastful on the other side of the room. "Mika," Robin spoke with an amused smile, "your hubris is showing." "Ah!" Mika screamed as she covered her body. Akio snorted with laughter. He covered his mouth, trying to hide his amusement. Robin was doing the same, though much more subtle. And everywhere in between on the Thousand Sunny. With each new room, Akio was astounded by what he saw. He never knew pirates had such cool stuff. And Mika, she was beginning to quickly warming up to the boy. Even actually having fun instead of acting out her frustrations. After an hour, both kids laid on the deck, breathing heavily and smiling. They had run all over the Sunny, seeing what it had to offer. From the soldier dock system to the Usopp's workshop to even the living quarters. Their game of tag had become less of a game and more about exploration and discovery. It was probably one of the greatest days of their young lives. "Hey, Mika," Akio spoke, having recovered enough to speak. "Yeah, I'm sorry, it's okay, you did it to help your mom," Mika said, smiling brightly. "And I'm sorry for being mad at you for a while." "And attacking me? No, you deserved that." Akio's sweat dropped. "Okay, fair enough." She, laughed Mika happily. Akio could not help but laugh along with her. He was just as happy as Mika. Though these kids had started out less than friends, now they were probably the best of friends, or close to it. During the whole moment, the Straw Hats watched them, looking both proud and happy, especially Nami. They were all happy to see Mika's animosity fade away and the spunky and playful girl returned. Nami did not want her daughter to hold on to hate like she did some years before. It was good for her to make a friend, even if they would have leave eventually. But for now, they could be happy. In Chopper's medical room, everything inside was deathly silent. Yuka sat on the medical bed while Chopper sat in his chair holding some papers. Though, he seemed to be crumpling the edges unintentionally. The expression on his face showed his shock at the results. Yuka could see the young doctor's expression and became worried. "Doctor?" she asked, sounding afraid. Chopper angrily frowned. He did not want to tell her, but as a doctor he could not lie to his patient. He turned around in his chair, looking back at the sickly woman. "Ms. Yuka," he spoke sadly but calmly, "you're dying. We are gathered here today." The marriage of Monkey D. Luffy and Nami, it seemed like hours for Yuka, but it was only just a few minutes after she had heard the news from Dr. Chopper. She stayed seated on the bed as she processed the information. At first, she could not believe the young doctor. There was no way it could be accurate. You can't be serious," still frowning sadly, Chopper shook his head. "I'm sorry," he spoke, "but the results don't lie. You only have 3 days to live." "That can't be true," Yuka said, her voice raising slightly. "I've been to the local doctor several times. He said I was fine." "It's a very particular disease you have," Chopper stated sadly. "The symptoms can be treated for a while, but they can't cure the initial disease." "Isn't there anything you can do?" Yuka asked, pleading softly. Chopper frowned. "I could whip up something that could give you a little bit more time, but any strenuous work will completely undo it. All I can recommend is to not place any more stress on yourself and relax. It may just aggravate it further." "Relax," Yuka said loudly in a sudden moment of anger that frightened the young doctor. Despite looking angry, she was also shedding tears. Her emotions were running wild. How can I be relaxed knowing I'm going to die, leaving my son all on his own in this world? How can I relax at all? M's Yuka, Chopper shouted, trying to calm the hysterical woman down. Though still angry, Yuka immediately went silent. Being caught off guard by the reindeer's shout, it gave the young woman a moment of clarity. Suddenly, her anger evaporated and was replaced with regret and sadness. "I'm sorry," Yuka said as she recoiled from her own behavior and began to cry. "I'm so sorry." Chopper did not say anything. He was not at all mad at the woman. He understood that she was in grieving, and it was typical for one to get angry. Since she had apologized, it meant that her mind had come to terms with her condition. At least, somewhat. Now came the difficult part for Chopper. "M's Yuka," Chopper spoke calmly. "Is there anyone I can inform, like family or friends?" Yuka did not say a thing. She only shook her head no. Chopper gulped, looking even worse. What will happen to Akio then? He thought worriedly. With Yuka not having any family or friends to speak of, Chopper bravely decided on another option. "May I?" he said, stopping for a moment, feeling nervous before forcing his question through. "May I inform my crew?" Not to his surprise, Yuka could not respond. She was continued to cry. Chopper frowned sadly. Since Yuka could not clearly respond, he decided to inform his crew anyway. Someone has to know, he reasoned to himself. The reindeer then slipped off his chair and proceeded to walk out of the room, doing so quietly as to give the woman her moment. Now, he had the hard duty to tell the others the bad news. Now outside, Chopper looked out to see that everyone was out on the deck and that all the crew was looking over at Mika and Akio, both laying on the grass laughing. If he was not feeling conflicted before, he was really feeling it now. What am I going to do? He thought worriedly. While nearly everyone was distracted by the two kids playing, Nami had taken a moment to look up towards Medical Bay to see if Chopper was done. To her surprise, Chopper was already out and looking down at the group. "Chop!" Nami was about to call to the reindeer, but then, she noticed his expression mixed sadness, nervousness, and completely conflicted. Immediately, she understood that something was wrong. Unfortunately, her short blurb had attracted everyone's attention. "Hey, Chopper!" Luffy shouted cheerfully. "You done already? Did you help Ms. Yuka?" Chopper gasped, caught completely by surprise. "Wait, Luffy," Nami said, trying to calm her lover down. Hearing the pirate captain, Akio and Mika sat up. The young boy looked up towards the doctor and stood up looking hopeful. "Is my mom okay?" he asked curiously. "Of course she is," Mika stated enthusiastically as she stood up. "Uncle Chopper is the best doctor ever." "Mika," Nami said, too late to stop her. Chopper gulped nervously. His situation was starting to get worse by the second. "What's up, Chopper?" asked Sanji, interestingly noticing the nervous expression on the doctor's face. "Give us the super news, Gorilla Reindeer," shouted Frankie, enthusiastic. "Yes," Brook said politely. "Please tell us." "Yeah," Usopp said, cheering optimistically. If Chopper was not feeling bad earlier, he was sure feeling it now. Chopper frowned as he could not bring himself to speak again. What could he say to everyone, especially with the children here? Luckily, one of the more observant members picked up on Chopper's worries. Robin turned to the kids and spoke. "Mika, Akio, how about we head over to the library?" "Huh?" said the children, confused. "Why?" Mika asked curiously. "A number of reasons actually," Robin said, smiling. "You see, there are certain things that only adults should hear first when it comes to medical practices. Usually just advice. I thought, since you two wouldn't want to hear boring adult stuff, I would show you this new book I bought. It is very interesting." Mika immediately bought Robin's statement. She smiled and nodded eagerly. "Okay." Akio said, not completely sure if he actually wanted to join them, but Mom. "Come on, Akio," Mika said before taking his arm and pulling. "Auntie Robin has the best storybooks." Akio was completely unable to argue back before Mika began pulling towards the library. Robin followed behind them, amused by her little niece's enthusiasm. She was also thankful for it since it was able to remove the children from this potentially touchy situation. "Oi!" shouted Sanji towards Akio, irritated. "You better keep your hands to yourself." Usopp gave Sanji a light backhand to his arm as if trying to knock some sense into him. "He's too young for that stuff, Sanji." When the Robin and the children were gone, Usopp decided to ask a question. So, why is it the kids needed to leave?" Zoro answered, "Because Chopper has something to say." "Huh?" said Luffy before looking over at Chopper. "Well, of course he does. He's going to tell us that Ms. Yuka is fine, right?" Chopper remained silent, frowning. In response, the rest of the crew went silent. Those who were originally optimistic had lost their optimism. They were all beginning to realize that what Chopper had to say was anything but good. Many of them were shocked, but oddly, Luffy looked so the most. "Chopper," Luffy said, "tell us." The young reindeer nodded. "It's not good, guys." It was now nighttime, and everyone aboard the Thousand Sunny seemed to be asleep. Still in the medical room, Yuka had fallen asleep and left there out of courtesy. Despite looking peaceful sleeping, the poor woman clearly had sadness etched on her face. It is most likely that she had cried herself to sleep. But now, she was beginning to wake up. Yuka woke up peacefully. She was slightly disorientated as she sat up on the bed. As her head cleared and her mind began working properly, she was confused as to where she was. It then dawned upon her that she was still in Chopper's medical room. Immediately after realizing this, Yuka remembered the terrible news she received. "I'm dying," Yuka frowned recalling this painful fact. She decided she no longer wanted to sleep. She left the medical room and began taking a stroll around the deck. As she walked, she marveled at what a beautiful night it was this night. She followed along the edge of the sunny keeping to the side facing the ocean. The full moon's light was glistening off the calm ocean. Despite her own situation, Yuka could not help but smile seeing this beautiful sight. It reminded her of better times in her short life. The young, sick woman kept walking, going down the stairs, and onto the grass deck. She noticed that there was something on the deck. Her curiosity brought her over to the object to find that it was white painted. Would Kahi this was here. It seemed completely out of place. They just wanted to have a marriage celebration thingy. Yuka recalled what Mika had said earlier. She was then able to put two and two together. A wedding canopy, she said surprised. As she looked at the well-made canopy, she began to smile with nostalgia. While Yuka stood before the canopy, a door began to open. Nami quietly exited hers and Luffy's room. She then walked out and leaned into the banister breathing out a sigh. She looked to have went through an ordeal. When she looked out towards the deck she spotted Yuka in front of the canopy. Immediately, she was curious. "M's Yuka?" Yuka gasped hearing someone speak. She turned around and spotted Nami. "Oh, Nami," she said surprised. "I thought everyone was asleep?" "For the most part," Nami said as she began to walk down towards Yuka. "I've had rough night talking with Luffy." "Is something wrong?" Nami said sounding slightly hesitant. "He's just had a bad memory," she said frowning. "This situation hasn't been good for everyone." Yuka immediately began to worry. What about Akio? Neither he or Mika know. Yuka was a little relieved to hear this. She did not want her son to be sad just yet. Not after he was finally beginning to enjoy himself with a new friend. "Where are they?" she asked. "Mika has a room below deck." A momentary pause as we check in on the two tykes. Like most everyone on the Sunny, they were asleep. However, nearly everyone but Luffy and Robin were sleeping with them. At some point, Mika had gotten nearly everyone to join her and Akio for a sleepover. The men laid all around the room in odd sleeping positions sleeping peacefully. Most of them were snoring as well. Oddly, no one was actually using the bed. In the middle of this, Mika and Akio were both sleeping on the floor, with blankets and pillows, sprawled out. Mika was snoring peacefully with her hand smashing into Akio's face. Surprisingly, the boy seemed to be sleeping peacefully despite his new friend's sleeping position. "Having a sleepover with the rest of the crew," Nami said with exasperated sigh. Yuka gasped a little with surprise, but smiled seeing how friendly this band of rogues was being. Her attention then returned back to the canopy and her thoughts of a wedding. She looked back at Nami wearing a curious look. "So," she said, "who is it getting married?" Nami looked a little nervous, but she replied, "It's mine and Luffy's. We were going to have it today but," Nami flashed an awkward smile, "you know." "I'm terribly sorry," Yuka said apologetic. "It's okay," Nami said now smiling appreciative of the apology. "Whoever heard of pirates getting married anyways?" "Now don't say that," Yuka said before smiling supportively. "Everyone has the right to be happy however they may find it. If you want to have this wedding, and everything is ready, you should do it immediately." Nami looked at the older woman surprised, "But Ms. Yuka." "My situation is bad," Yuka said placing her hand gently on Nami's shoulder, "but that shouldn't ruin your happy day." While Nami did have her concerns over Yuka's suggestion, but in seeing how strongly Yuka was supporting her she had to agree. "Alright," she said smiling, "we'll have the wedding in the morning." Yuka smiled and nodded in agreement. "Good. I look forward to seeing you in a beautiful wedding dress and getting married." Nami giggled, enjoyed the attention from the older mother. "Yeah, though you'll have to do without a wedding dress." "Oh," Yuka said surprised. "I couldn't find a dress before the Marines chased us out of town. I do have some other nice clothes though. Should be fine, right?" Despite Nami's carefree attitude, Yuka still looked concerned. It was not as if she did not agree with her, but she felt a little sad that this beautiful, young woman could not look her best even for a small wedding. "Just like ours, Daisuke," she thought fondly to herself. In remembering these memories, Yuka realized something important and began smiling. "M's Yuka?" asked Nami curious. "My word," Yuka said acting slightly stern towards Nami. "What is a young bride like you doing up this late?" "Huh?" Nami said surprised. Yuka soon began pushing the younger woman back towards her room. "The bride shouldn't be looking tired on her wedding day. You go right back to bed, young ma'am." "What? Off to bed now?" Yuka said as she gave Nami one last, light push towards the stair. Nami said confused before she began walking by herself. Before walking up the stairs, Nami looked back at Yuka, still confused despite obeying her. Okay then, good night, she replied to older woman. Good night. Yuka replied back happily. Though still very confused, Nami returned to her room. Once the door was closed, Yuka looked over towards the forest and the island. She wore a determined expression and began walking toward the edge of the Thousand Sunny. She stopped momentarily as she recalled what Chopper had said earlier. All I can recommend is to not place any more stress on yourself and relax. It may just aggravate it further. As she reached the gangplank, she stopped. Recalling that made her hesitant to take another step. They were quite far away from her home. Was it worth the risk? She clenched her fists as she made her decision. She took a step forward onto the gangplank left there by the Straw Hat crew. From there, she walked down the gangplank. She then walked onto the island and then sprinted into the dark forest. Determination was etched into her expression. What was so important that she would risk her health for? In the morning, everyone awoke and met in the dining room for breakfast. Even Yuka, who had returned by morning, was there able to greet her son. She looked a little tired, but her cheerfulness seemed to easily cover anything concerning. Akio was definitely none the wiser to it. Morning, Mom. Akio said happily. Yuka smiled at her son. Good morning, Akio. Morning, Ms. Yuka, Mika said loudly and just as happy with a grin. This time, Yuka reacted with a soft laugh, enjoying the little girl's energy once again. And good morning to you, Mika. How was the sleepover, fellas? Asked Robin, being curious. Yeah, Chopper said cheerfully. It was fun. Usopp rubbed his like it was sore. He then responded, I think I was sleeping on a toy or something. My neck is killing me. Zoro yawned. I slept fine. It was Sanji's turn, and he gave Nami a military salute, looking serious. Mikaheim was safely protected, Nami. Nami rolled her eyes at Sanji. Like her daughter would be in any trouble, but she knew it was the thought that counts. Thanks, Sanji. Ah, thank you, Nami, Sanji said, immediately overjoyed and being complimented. Sanji, shouted Luffy impatiently. Food? Sanji immediately returned to his usual calm demeanor. He responded back, right, before heading into the kitchen to make breakfast. We had a super night, Frankie said with a grin and thumbs up. Yes, though it seemed nearly impossible to get Mika to go to sleep with so many of us with her, Brooke said before laughing lightheartedly. But you're not supposed to go to sleep at sleepovers, Mika stated before pointing. That's what Uncle Usopp said. Akio looked over at Mika dryly. I think that defeats the point of a sleepover. In response, Mika stuck her tongue out at the boy. What do you know? You're not the sleepover king like Uncle Usopp. Yeah, Usopp said proudly, with his ego being boasted by his niece. Chopper also cheered out the same, agreeing with Mika. Akio was not buying it. You do know that he's lying, right? What? Shouted both Mika and Chopper, shocked. Shouldn't you know as an adult? Responded Akio towards the reindeer. Yuka laughed, enjoying the lively atmosphere. She had never experienced company like this before. It was so fun for her. She had never seen her son act this way before, but she was enjoying it. In seeing the older woman looking cheerful, Nami smiled, a good time to announce something important. Everyone, Nami said loudly, thus gaining everyone's attention. I have an announcement to make. Huh? What is it, Nami? Asked Luffy, confused. Today, we're doing the wedding and nothing is going to stop it. Said nearly the entire group, mostly from the crew, shocked. Akio leaned over to Mika looking confused. What's a wedding? He asked, whispering. Something parents do so that they'll stay together forever, Mika replied, also whispering. Oh, but Nami, spoke up Usopp, sounding nervous, isn't it a bit soon to be doing this? He said this while glancing over at Yuka, who was simply smiling with joy over the announcement. Nami understood what Usopp was trying to say. Nevertheless, she shook her head and responded, no, now is the perfect time. Nami, said Sanji, slightly concerned. I think it's a wonderful idea. A few of the Straw Hats looked shocked as they heard Yuka's voice speak up. The young woman continued smiling and was looking even happier. I would love to see the wedding. Okay, Luffy said, grinning happily. Let's do this then, Captain's orders. Well, if the captain agrees, Robin said, smiling amusedly. No use arguing really, Sanji said, grinning while he cooked. Zoro chuckled and grinned. Well, it had to happen sometime. While little surprised by Yuka's acceptance of this idea, Usopp just let his concerns roll off his shoulders. He smiled as he became joyful. Alright then, let the wedding of Monkey D. Luffy, the future Pirate King, and Nami, eventual drawer of the greatest world map, begin. Yeah, shouted Chopper and Mika together, excited. Super, shouted Frankie, also excited. Yo ho ho, excellent, shouted Brooke, overjoyed. Mama, Mika spoke, looking up at her mother. She had a very displeased expression as she asked her mother, do I still have to wear a dress? Nami sighed, though still retaining a smile. No, you don't. Yay, Mika cheered with a wide grin. Her shout made every adult laugh. The group soon had breakfast, and once done, everyone got ready for the wedding. For the most part, everything was ready. The only thing missing was for Nami to get dressed up for the occasion. Currently, she and all the women were in hers and Luffy's room. Mika had so bluntly stated she was not interested in being girly, much to the despair of Sanji, and remained with the others. Yuka, however, was a good substitution. In the Luffy and Nami's room, Nami was having Robin help her with preparations. It was not much, just some makeup and a second opinion, but Nami wanted it for better or worse. Yuka sat on the bed providing conversation and her own experience to the preparation. As for what she was going to wear, Nami had chosen the one Robin had approved of, her 5th outfit during their adventure on Thriller Bark. Robin soon finished up the little touches to Nami's face. She backed up to get a second look before smiling. "There," she said proudly, "you look beautiful, Nami." "You truly do," Yuka added warmly. Nami took a look at herself in the mirror. Robin did not apply much makeup, but there was an obvious and noticeable differences. One she liked. After checking side to side, she smiled and looked at her crewmate. "Thank you, Robin," she said in gratitude, "it's perfect." "Even without the wedding dress?" asked Yuka coyly. "I don't really need the dress anyway," Nami said, smiling genuinely. "This will still be one of the best days of my life." "I'm happy that you feel that way, Nami," Yuka said, smiling before standing up. "But I feel even if this is a small event that you should still look your best." "What are you?" Nami spoke as she watched the older woman suddenly pull out a folded white dress. She immediately gasped in surprise. "Ms. Yuka." "Nami," Yuka spoke, holding out the white dress towards the younger woman. "It's a little old, but I want you to have this." Nami looked at Yuka surprised. "What? Go on," Yuka said gently as she continued to hold the dress out. Not wanting to be rude, Nami took the dress. She held up the dress, letting it unfurl down to see it in full, and she was amazed by it. The dress was simple in design, a strapless tulle with a lace applique. There was an elegance to it that was breathtaking. Though Yuka had informed her that it was old and worn, she would have believed that this wedding dress was brand new. She turned around with the dress to view it in perspective in the mirror. Seeing herself and the dress together, she was absolutely speechless. "It looks beautiful," Robin commented with a smile. "Thank you," Yuka said humbly. "Ms. Yuka," Nami said, astonished. "It may be a little big," Yuka said as she walked next to Nami, looking at her and the dress in the mirror, "but I'm sure I can make fit you." Nami said, but could not. She was so touched by the gesture from the older woman she almost began to cry. She instead smiled and nodded, replying back emotional, "Thank you." Yuka smiled back. She was happy to have helped. Robin, on the other hand, looked very concerned. "Ms. Yuka," she spoke, "when did you bring this dress aboard?" "I went out and brought it here," Yuka said casual. Nami gasped. "Ms. Yuka, please don't worry," Yuka said calmly, "I'm fine really." "If you say so," Nami said, unsure. "I do. Now hold still while I fix this dress." "Well then," Robin spoke as she began to leave, "I better make sure the groom has his suit." "Good idea," Yuka said in agreement. Robin then left the room. She could hear Yuka's plans for Nami as she shut door. It seemed to involve some flowers, something she could approve of. She then headed down to the others on the grass deck. She could see that they were currently in waiting. "Hey, Robin," called out Usopp, noticing the woman coming towards them. "Is Nami ready yet?" When she reached the bottom of the stairs, Robin answered, "No, she will need a little more time." "Really? How come?" asked Usopp. "Ms. Yuka has provided her with a wedding dress." "Wow," said Usopp, amazed. "How nice of her." Akio looked confused. "Mom had a wedding dress." "What about a dress?" Luffy asked, curious. "Luffy," spoke Robin to her captain smile, "you should get your suit on." "Ah, do I have to?" Robin chuckled. "I believe you know the answer to that." Luffy sighed and nodded. "Right, I'm going," he said before heading towards the men's quarters. "I'll go help him," Sanji said coolly as he followed behind Luffy. As Robin watched the two men go, she felt a tug from her shirt. She looked down and saw Mika holding her shirt. The young girl was looking up at her with curious eyes. She asked, "What is it, Mika?" "Do I still have to be the flower girl?" She didn't say otherwise, so I would think so. "Ah, man," Mika said before crossing her arms and pouting with disdain. Robin felt a little bad for her little niece. Though she knew the little girl would get over it, she decided on another option. "Mika," she spoke softly, "would you like to make a compromise?" "Huh?" Luffy was the first one to step out of his room. He was wearing a very nice black suit with a red undershirt and black tie, strong world outfit minus coat, thought still wearing his sandals. He immediately took his place in front of Zoro, soon followed by everyone standing behind him. With the exception of Yuka, who was given a chair to sit on. Everything and everyone were positioned just in front of stairs, making it a rough straight line. Only Brook, who stood to the side ready to play his violin, Mika, who was standing near the stairs close to parents' room, and Sanji, standing by the room, were the only ones not joining them for one reason or another. As he stood attentively, Sanji soon heard the door open. He turned to see Nami, only to be completely caught off guard by her. Nami stepped out of the dark room, revealing all the preparation and time that Robin and Yuka to make her so beautiful. Her white dress fit her body like destiny thanks to Yuka's hard work. The veil that thinly covered her face could not mile she wore that even outperformed the little makeup applied did. In her hands was a bouquet of white lily flowers that looked like the stars themselves. She was more beautiful in this one moment than she had in any moment previous, including when she had once already been in a wedding dress. That moment specifically paled to this. As she stepped out, Nami looked at Sanji, now gaping in amazement, and asked, "So, how'd I look?" Sanji frankly could barely speak. Every ounce of his being wanted to proclaim his love, a love for all beautiful women, to the heavens themselves and swoop her off her feet. However, as a man, he knew she was not his to take. So instead of his usual act, Sanji smiled warmly as he extended his hand towards saying, "Luffy won't be able to take his eyes off you for a second." While a little surprised by Sanji's calm answer, she did accept his answer with her own smile. She then took his hand and was led down the stairs. At this moment, everyone noticed Nami had finally stepped out. Every last one of the Straw Hats were completely and utterly stunned by Nami. "Wow," said Usopp, nearly speechless. Frankie lifted his sunglasses, staring at Nami's stunned, girly looks. "Super," Chopper said, finishing Frankie's sentence with amazement. "Yeah." Brook even began to cry. "Oh, what a beautiful moment," the skeleton said through his tears. "To think I would live to see such a lovely moment between two of my crewmates." And to everyone's surprise, he left it at that. This moment was too precious for jokes, even by him. Robin did not say a thing. She was smiling softly, overjoyed by how beautiful the girl was. In a rare show of emotions, she was even shedding a soft tear. Yuka covered her mouth in joy as her own tears of joy flowed more freely than Robin's. Despite having helped with Nami's dress, she found it even more beautiful than just a few minutes ago, and Yuka could not be happier for it. Even Akio, despite being so young, was completely captivated by the sight. Whoa. Luffy, just as Sanji had said, had his eyes were completely on Nami. For once, everything to him that mattered, such as his next meal and even being king of the pirates, no longer was for this single moment in his life. Now, even more so than before, he thought of Nami, how beautiful she was, how important she was to him, and how they, himself, Nami, and Mika, would continue moving on as a family with their crew friends' family to achieve their dreams and goals, and discover them as well. Luffy, the young captain, heard Zoro, but he could not look away from Nami. "You found a good woman." Nearly absently, Luffy nodded his head, though still staring at Nami. "Thanks." Zoro's smile grew slightly. He never would have thought Luffy could be more dumbfounded than now. When Nami finally reached the bottom of the stairs, Mika immediately greeted her. "Mama," she said, sounding amazed and cheerful. "You look so pretty." Nami smiled brightly, even more so, and bent down to her daughter's height. "Thank you, sweetie," she said happily. "So do you." "Even without a dress?" "Especially," Nami said before wrapping Mika in a hug while keeping the flowers in hand. Her daughter immediately recuperated the same. When they broke, however, Nami's changed to confusion as she noticed something off about Mika. "Where's your flower basket?" she asked. Mika grinned proudly. Auntie Robin said she would do the flowers. She then pulled up a pillow from behind her back. On it were the 2 rings that would bind Luffy and Nami together. The little girl then proudly spoke, "Now I get to be the cool ring bearer." While Nami was initially surprised by the sudden change up, she did not let it anger her, or more accurately, she could not be anger. Even if this was not what she wanted for her daughter, Nami valued that Mika still wanted to be a part of the ceremony, and that is all that really mattered. "Well then, my cool, little ring-bearing daughter," Nami said as she stood back up, smiling and placing her arm around Sanji's arm, "you better start heading towards Daddy." Mika grinned and nodded happily. "Okay," she shouted before she began walk forward. Then, it was Robin's cue to do her part. "Ocho fleur," she said softly as she crossed her arms. 8 of her arms soon appeared on the side of the aisle and eventual Nami and Sanji where Mika would walk by. As Mika began walking down the aisle, Robin had her extra limbs burst into flower petals in front of the little girl 2 at a time. Nami watched this unfold and she, admittedly, found it much more enjoyable than just having her daughter do it herself. As Nami watched Mika reach the end, she noticed that she was not going over to stand with the others. Instead, she went up to Luffy. The 2 of them seemed to have a little moment where they hugged, and then Mika joined next to Zoro's side. Apparently, the girl really wanted to be a part of the ceremony. "Oh Mika," Nami said to herself, smiling warmly. Then, Brook began to play his violin. Yuka stood up and joined the others, standing and looking at Nami. Everyone stood at attention. "This is it," Nami thought to herself happily. Nami and Sanji began walking down the aisle. As they did, Nami looked at each and every one of her crewmates and friends. Everyone was smiling towards, each happy for her, as she did to them, thankful for joining such a wonderful crew. The 2 of them walked all the way down until just before meeting Luffy. Then, Sanji bent down slight and took Nami's hand, giving her a chaste kiss before standing up. He then looked over to Luffy, smiling. "I don't think there's anything for me to say that I know you won't already do for Nami." Luffy smiled and nodded. Sanji accepted this and took his leave. He joined with the rest of the crew standing between Robin and Yuka and watched the rest of the ceremony. Nami smiled towards Sanji, appreciating his words before looking forward. She only took one step forward before already being right next to her husband-to-be. While still facing forward, Nami gave Luffy a comment. "You look handsome, Luffy." Luffy blushed slight before chuckling and grinning. "And you look really, really beautiful, Nami." Nami blushed slightly, looking very happy. "Alright," Zoro said as he returned to his usual grumpy mood, "let's get this over with." Brook immediately stopped playing. Dearly, Zoro paused as he tried to remember the next part, betrothed. Immediately, Sanji shouted in rage, "Get your lines right, you stupid moss head." "Shut up, dart brow." Sanji. Usopp said, holding the enraged chef back with Chopper, now in heavy point. Everyone else kept their calm, especially Nami, who was definitely annoyed by the sudden outburst. She forced a smile as she looked directly at Zoro and ordered tensely, "Please continue, Zoro." In seeing Nami's expression, Zoro quickly returned to form as he continued with the ceremony, "Dearly beloved." Finally, "Shush, Sanji, forget it," Zoro said as he could not clearly remember his lines. "We are all here today to celebrate the marriage of our captain, Monkey D. Luffy, and the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates, Nami. As the first member of the crew, I was there when she first joined. I didn't think she was trustworthy at the time, but I eventually came to see her as our one and only navigator as well. I would also like to say, again, about damn time." "Oi," Nami said, starting to lose her patience. "Anyway, if you two want to say anything to each other, say so now." "I do," Nami said as she turned to Luffy, him doing the same. "Luffy, when we met, I only wanted to use you for my own gain. I overlooked your otherwise nice personality and saw you as a bad person because you were a pirate. If I could, I think I would slap myself for that line of thinking." Luffy remained silent. But as he traveled together, I saw the real you. A brave, often reckless, man who would always do what's right in your own way. Whether that meant just beating someone up or waiting for a foolish girl to ask for help. You've done soilage, getting me to a doctor, bringing me on wild adventures, blessing me with a wonderful daughter. I don't think I can ever repay you for that. You may think you have a debt with me, but honestly, I have more of one to you. Nami, but that's not why I'm marrying you, Nami continued. I'm marrying you because you never gave up on the foolish girl who had nearly given up on saving her village. For the man who would risk his life for any of his crew and who in turn would risk theirs for him. A man who can be so selfish that he's actually helping others unknowingly. The man who loves his family, even if it's a weird one. For trusting me with not just one, but two of his precious treasures. And most importantly, for the man I fell in love with. I love you so much. I would be honored to be your wife and one day your queen. I will always be your navigator." There was a small pause as everyone let Nami's words sink in. Everyone was smiling, some even slightly crying, as they were touched by her words. Now, it was Luffy's turn. "Nami," Luffy said, smiling softly before turning it into a grin, "I love you." It was short, but if you think about it, this simple, mundane phrase meant so much more to the couple. I, meaning Luffy, love, one of the most powerful emotions felt by mankind, and the most important of all. You, meaning Nami and only Nami. In this one sentence, Luffy conveyed everything. He loved Nami for her skills, for which she used to help and aid himself, his daughter, and crew with. He loved Nami as his crewmate and friend, who would never turn on them. He loved Nami as the mother of his child, for though it was an experience neither of them knew much on, she always did her best. He loved her even when she gets angry at him, because even then, she was still looking out for him. He loved her greedy side, which tended to make many quiver in fear, as she always made sure to use the money to help out the crew. He loved her as a woman and a lover, as there are some things that only those close together can convey to each other openly and support each other from now until they die. Simply put it, what Luffy is saying is, I love you, all of you, Nami. But would Nami understand that? Could she understand the layers of deepness hidden in a common phrase used by every couple everywhere? Yes she did. In just hearing those words, those simple words, Nami could feel all that Luffy kid and would convey. She nearly teared up just thinking about it all. Not even hesitating for a moment, Nami hugged Luffy, almost breaking her bouquet. It surprised him, but Luffy graciously hugged her back. "Ahu!" cheered out Usopp as he and everyone started clapping and cheering. They had not even been married yet, but they could not help cheering them on. Alright, let's finish this up," Zoro said, interrupting the moment. Everyone soon calmed down. Luffy and Nami soon separated. They both flashed a loving and caring smile towards each other before turning to Zoro. Now, it was time to finish this ceremony. Now then, if there isn't anyone stupid enough to try and object. Zoro paused for a moment, knowing full well no one would speak up. He then turned and addressed Mika. "Give them the rings." Mika immediately did so. She walked up right in front of Zoro and held up the rings to her parents. "Thank you, Mika," Nami said, smiling as she took the ring for the husband. "Thanks," Luffy said with a grin as he took the ring for the wife. With the rings gone, Mika took a step back and joined by Zoro's side. She did not want to miss this. After Luffy and Nami slipped the rings onto each other, they stood hand in hand continuing to face each other. Then by the power granted to me by our captain, Zoro said loudly and proudly for everyone to hear, I declare these two, husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride. Luffy grinned brightly as he flipped the veil off Nami's face. With both of them smiling, they came together right in the middle and kissed. Immediately, nearly all the men in the room whooped and hallowed and cheered as the union was finally official. Brook began playing music again, though now in cheerful celebration of the happy union. Yuka and Robin simply clapped cheering on the couple in their own way. Akio was doing the same, though only because his mother was doing so as well. In reality, he thought the kissing was gross. Zoro just stood before the couple smiling proudly and equally as joyful as the rest of the crew. And though Mika thought the kissing was a little gross, she was far happier than anyone in the crew seeing how much her parents loved each other. Luffy and Nami soon broke off the kiss. They looked at each other and flashed happy grins towards each other. While holding hands, the two newly married couple turned to face the crowd basking in their cheer and admiration. Suddenly, they both felt a little hand on top of theirs. They looked down to see Mika, grinning. She seemed to have wanted to join them. Without hesitation, the couple's hands broke apart only to now join them with Mika's hands. The adults raised their hands slightly high with Mika's hands in tow as they showed to everyone the officially complete Monkey D family, and everyone cheered. The union of Monkey D, Luffy and Nami was now complete. Death in the family. A burial for a loving mother. The reception was instantly over. Yuka was immediately brought into Chopper's medical room as quickly as possible. Chopper then went to work trying to help Yuka the best he could. Everyone else stood outside, waiting, wondering, and hoping for the best. Among them, Akio was looking absolutely terrified and nearly crying. Mika too looked just as shocked. She had never seen someone start bleeding like that. It was a little scary for her. All the adults of course were extremely worried. The most evident among them were Nami. Everyone else remained more or less stoic. It was not long before Chopper finally exited the room, currently in his brainpoint form. Everyone stiffened, hoping beyond hope, but the grim expression on Chopper's face was evidence enough. I'm sorry, Chopper said, lowering his head down, unable to meet anyone's eye. There's nothing I can do. Akio looked at the reindeer heartbroken. No, Chopper began shedding tears as he painfully spoke again. Ms. Yuka probably won't make it through the night. No, finally, Akio broke down. The boy began shedding tears as he ran into the medical room. The Straw Hats remained completely silent. Many of them were showing their shock while others remained stoic. Nami was probably the most distraught besides Akio and Chopper. The poor reindeer himself was still crying as well, seeing how painful delivering this news was. I'm so sorry, guys. Chopper said as he lifted his head. He was clearly still crying as his tears flowed like rivers out of his eyes. His blue nose was beginning to run with snot. Hey, Chopper, Usopp said as he walked over and patted the young reindeer. It's not your fault. There was no way you could have prevented this. Still, Chopper shouted, still feeling bad. I wanted to help her. How could she have gotten worse? Nami gasped in realization. She spoke feeling ashamed. We talked last night, and I mentioned I didn't have a wedding dress. I told her I didn't need one, but then today, she had one. I think she traveled to her home and back. Sanji took a cigarette out. Despite Mika being in plain view, he just felt like he needed it now. He stuck it in his mouth and lit it. He smoked before he spoke up. She must have pushed herself to give you a beautiful memory. Nami frowned, lowering her head down sad. She shouldn't have done that. There's no point dwelling on that now, Zoro commented calmly. Mama, spoke up Mika softly and a little scared. What's wrong with Ms. Yuka? Nami looked down at daughter. She frowned, seeing how confused yet also hurt Mika was currently experiencing. Mika. What did Uncle Chopper mean by she won't make it through the night? Mika asked, beginning to tear up. Mika, isn't she alright? Asked Mika as a few tears began flowing down her face. Nami was unable to say any more. She took Mika and gently wrapped her in a hug, pulling her in close. Nami remained strong as she held her daughter, though she too felt like crying. I'm sorry, said Nami softly yet sad, but Ms. Yuka is not okay. In the medical room, Akio had run to his mother. Seeing his mother in bed, sick and dying, only seemed to make his sadness even worse. He didn't even know why he went into this room. He came here out of pure instinct, needing comfort from his mother. He had then rushed over to his mother's side, only to stop at her bedside. He sprawled over the side and continued crying into the bed. Being his mother, Yuka wasn't surprised. She immediately comforted the boy, placing her hand on the boy's head and rubbing it gently. Shush, Yuka said, trying to calm her son. Everything will be okay, Akio. No, it's not, cried out Akio, quickly. Yuka frowned and went quiet. Her son had every right to not believe her, but still, that did not mean she had to let her son feel sad and depressed. But everything will be okay. she told her son again more confidently. Akio clenched his teeth and shook his head in the sheets. No, it won't, you're dying. I know, and I'm sorry. Yuka said, smiling sadly. I wanted to be there for much of your life like I had always hoped, but it seems fate had different plans. Akio looked up from the bed covers. He was still crying as he told his mother, I don't want you to die. I know, Yuka said softly before moving closer to hug her son and comfort him more. I know. What am I going to do? Akio whispered softly, sounding afraid. Oh, Akio. Yuka said, smiling warmly as she began stroking the boy's back. I know you'll know what to do. You're such a bright boy. That's why your father named you Akio, because we hope the best for you. Immediately, Akio became angry. He broke away from his mother's hug and looked up at her, showing his anger. How can you still think about that guy? Yuka looked at her son, upset. Akio, he hasn't come back in years. He's not coming back. He's a jerk. But you keep praising him like he's some hero. He's not. Then Akio left quickly. Despite being also sad, he could not face his mother being so angry. Akio. Yuka spoke out aghast. She had attempted to stop him, but could not in her condition. With the door left open, Nami peered inside the room looking confused. It was obvious that she had caught sight of the boy running out of the room angry and sad at the same time. This made her concerned for the sickly woman, so she had come in to check on her. Ms. Yuka? Yuka gave out a sigh. I'm afraid I made the mistake of bringing up his father, my husband Daisuke. He's not overly fond of him. Is there a reason? Nami asked as she approached the sick woman. I think it's because he has never met him. He left shortly after he was born, off to make the world a better place for us, Yuka said fondly. As Nami sat down next to Yuka, she looked at the woman surprised. Is he with the Marines? Responded Yuka with a hum. She was smiling contently, though seemingly unsure herself what it is he did. While not a clear answer, Nami left things be. It did not really concern her. In fact, it was probably better for her not to know. Since you're here, Nami. Yuka suddenly spoke, gaining the woman's full attention. I wanted to ask a favor. You do? Yes. Yuka said, nodding. I know you don't owe me anything, but if it weren't too much trouble, I was wondering if you could perhaps accept Akio onto your crew. Nami stared at Yuka, shocked. What? That is, if you think you can. Yuka, I know, Yuka said, quickly cutting Nami off, smiling knowingly. It's probably not feasible for you all. I'm sorry. No, I mean, Nami said, unsure. I know we seem friendly, but we're still a pirate crew. We might not be dangerous, but there are hundreds of pirate crews, and on top of that the Marines, which could hurt Akio. And Mika too. Don't you think he would be safer staying on this island? He would, Yuka said, agreeing, but I don't think he would be happy here. Without being told, Nami understood what the woman meant. All right, she said cautiously. I'll have to ask Luffy and crew though. Luffy is the captain and it's his decision to make, and everyone needs to be okay with it. Yuka smiled and nodded. If you could run it by everyone, I would appreciate it. Nami nodded silently in agreement. When Akio had run out, nearly every Straw Hat had turned to see him. Only Mika did not, choosing to remain face down in her Aunt Robin's lap. Meanwhile, the rest were surprised to suddenly see the boy. When they noticed that the boy was crying, they figured that something was still wrong. As they saw the boy heading for the gangplank, a few of them became concerned. Quickly, and being closest to the boy, Usopp and Frankie attempted to stop the boy. Whoa! Shouted Frankie quickly while holding out his arms and hands out to block the path. Hold up, kid. Yeah, don't. Usopp was then cut off as Akio kicked him right in the family jewels. The man hadn't expected it to happen, and was completely unguarded. Thus, he shrieked out loudly in pain. And nose bro, Frankie shouted out in shock. With the two adults distracted, Akio sought to escape. As he was about to step onto the gangplank, he was suddenly and surprisingly surrounded by feminine arms and hands. Some of them even appearing on his body. Frozen with shock, the limbs quickly wrapped around the boy and halted his movement off the ship. Confused, he shouted, what? Of course, this was obviously Robin's doing. She had her free hand up and crossed across her body as her usual gesture for activating her power. With the boy stopped, Robin spoke to him with a stern gaze. Now is not the time to run away, little boy. Let me go, shouted Akio angrily, still shedding tears. I won't, Robin stated calmly. Hearing her aunt speak, Mika turned her head. Though she was still crying, she was curious to what was happening, when she saw surprised her. As the boy struggled in the arms, he felt someone grab the scruff of his shirt. The arms disappeared into flower petals and he was lifted up suddenly. Akio turned his head to see that it was the Straw Hat captain himself that had grabbed him. The scary but serious expression he was making made the boy stop moving out of fear. What do you think you're doing? Luffy asked sternly. Despite how serious the man sounded, the boy had decided to not be compliant. He began to start thrashing about in the man's grip while shouting, let me go. I don't want to be here anymore. Your mom is dying, Luffy stated clearly and without hesitation, remaining stern. And the last thing she wants is to see her kid running away from like she's some kind of monster. Do you think your mom is happy that you are running away from her? Having heard this, Akio stopped struggling in the man's clutch. He lowered his head ashamed, realizing that what the man was very much correct. Seeing that the boy was done struggling, Luffy lowered him down. You don't need to go back into her room if you don't feel up to it, he stated calmly. But don't run off and make her feel worse. But, Akio said nervously, and still sad, do you want for your mother's last memory of you to be a sad one? Akio remained silent for a moment. The man's question had stuck him hard. Immediately, he calmed down. I'm sorry, he apologized sadly. Don't tell me that, Luffy said apathetically. Akio? Everyone heard Nami's voice and looked back at the medical room. The young woman was standing by the railing. She appeared to have been looking for the boy. The chocolate brown-haired boy looked to the lady. While he still felt angry over his father, he knew his mother didn't deserve it. Without replying back to her, Akio walked up the stairs and over past Nami. He then walked back into the medical room, and he closed the door behind him. Damn, Captain, Sanji said, smiling with astonishment. I didn't think you could get serious in moments like these. Very impressive, Brooke said, agreeing with the chef. A little confused, Nami looked out to her crew. She asked, what happened? Hearing Nami first, Chopper spoke to the woman. How is she? He asked, concerned. She's fine for the moment, Nami said as she walked down the stairs. She was worried about Akio, but I guess he got over it. You should thank your husband for that, Zoro stated while leaning against the mast. Nami looked at Zoro surprised. Really? She asked before looking over at Luffy himself. It was then at seeing him that she recalled her conversation earlier with Yuka. While she wanted to ask him immediately, she felt that the time was not yet right. Not with the children still awake, she decided to wait until later to ask. After much time had passed, the sun was beginning to set. Not much else was done this day after the wedding, the reception. No one spoke of the inevitable fate of Ms. Yuka. Mika, the usual bundle of limitless energy, had actually remained quiet for the rest of the day. She had stopped crying, though still feeling bad. She didn't feel like playing. Eventually, she just went to her room claiming to be going to bed. Around the same time, Akio had been sent out of the medical room by his mother for bed. He silently went with Mika to her room. Neither one spoke to other. In the meantime, Nami spoke to the crew about what Yuka had asked of them. As they sat around the deck, the orange-haired woman spoke to them of Yuka's request. To say they were a little surprised would be an understatement. Most didn't think that they would acquire another so soon, much less one that wasn't related to any of them. What do you guys think? Asked Nami to her crew. I think, Usopp said, being the first to speak, while it would be good for Mika to have someone her age around, it'll probably be more trouble for us in the future for sure. Yes, but we already accepted that with Mika-chan. What's one more child? Brooke stated, trying to be logical. Sanji blew smoke before he replied next. One more mouth to feed. We'd be risking the lives of 2 kids now, Frankie stated, frowning unhappily. Don't say that, Nami said, wincing a bit. Every time I think about that, it makes me feel like I'm a bad parent. We all know that's not true, Robin said, reassuring the young woman and smiling. Mika is very happy living with you, Luffy, and us. There have certainly been a few snags, but we have overcome them together. Nami smiled and nodded. Yeah, we have. Not to ruin the mood, Zoro spoke, acting serious, but I'm not all for letting the kid join just to watch over him. What? Shouted many of the crew. How could you be so mean, Zoro? Shouted Usopp angrily. Yeah, you jerk, shouted Chopper, also mad. Don't you have a heart? Both Chopper and Usopp shouted together in rage. As his 2 crewmates yelled at him, Zoro became increasingly annoyed with them. So much so that he shouted, shut up. Immediately, the 2 back off and the green-haired man quickly cooled down before he began speaking again. All I'm saying is, this kid is not getting the same treatment as Mika. If he is going to join, he's joining as an official crew member. Luffy blinked in surprise. He hadn't thought of a new crew member joining in a long while, and he had never thought about having a kid join. Not unless they could do something cool. But was Akio someone cool he would want on the crew? Meanwhile, everyone else looked at Zoro surprised. That's a thought, Frankie stated, being serious. Should we allow a child to officially join the crew? Brooke asked, curious. Technically, we already did, Usopp stated, obviously referring to Mika.
Chopper nodded fervently. He's right. Granted, Usopp said, continuing statement, she was born into the crew.
Sanji took a moment to think as he also blew out smoke from cigarette. Anyway, I have to agree with Moss Head on this. If we're going to take on Akio, it'll be as a crewmate and not as a charge. Mika is only one who gets to be pampered for free. I don't know, Nami said, unsure. She wasn't sure if Yuka would accept such conditions for her son. It seemed a little harsh. I think our captain has already decided, Robin stated, looking off somewhere, smiling with amusement. The crew looked at the woman surprised before turning to look where their captain sat. His spot was completely empty, prompting group to look up to see their captain already on the second deck. He was already walking in the medical. The last thing they saw was their captain grinning before entering the room. Luffy had heard enough from his crew's delegation, not like he ever needed a reason. Still, this was an important decision that needed it. As Luffy entered the room, he quickly greeted the woman. "Hi, Ms. Yuka." Yuka instantly smiled. "Hello, Captain Luffy." "So," Luffy said as he took a seat on Chopper's office chair. "Yes?" Yuka asked, curious. "I want Akio to join my crew as our cabin boy." The sickly woman was taken by surprise by the sudden forwardness of the man. While she had expected there to be some hesitation, she couldn't believe that the man would so quickly accept her request, albeit slightly DWAS happy. "You will?" Yuka said, overjoyed. "But," Luffy said in conjecture, "I won't force him to join." Yuka's joy lessened instantly. The woman had to take a moment to think over what the man had said. While she liked that her son had the option, it was a little less encouraging knowing her son could decline. And after this whole experience, he may just. Nevertheless, she had to accept and hope her son would accept. "Very well, Luffy, thank you." Luffy grinned back the woman. "No problem," he said happily. "I hope he joins." Yuka smiled and nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "I hope he does too." When all was said and done, everyone turned in for the night. In the morning, Chopper was the first up to check on Yuka. He hoped beyond hope that he somehow misdiagnosed the woman and that she was sleeping peacefully. As he entered the medical room, he looked at the bed in which the woman was lying on. He approached cautiously, neither wanting to wake her up or find out the truth. As he saw the woman's face, oddly smiling softly, he began to feel nauseous from nervousness. "Ms. Yuka?" Chopper spoke nervously. Yuka did not respond. Cautiously, he gave the woman a light poke to wake her. She did not wake. Immediately, Head began checking her. He first began looking over the woman visually. He found that her chest wasn't moving. He went in closer and felt the woman's hand. It was cold. Becoming fearful, Chopper then checked the woman's pulse. There was none. With all the signs there, the young reindeer lowered his head. He tried hard to fight back the tears, but he simply could not. Even after knowing this would be the result, he still couldn't help but mourn. Yuka, mother of Akio, was dead. When the whole crew and the kids were up, Chopper had waited just before breakfast to tell them news. Every adult remained silent, lowering their heads in sadness and respect. Mika was far less prepared for this moment. She had immediately began crying. Luckily, her father was nearby to provide comfort for his daughter. On the other hand, Akio was trying his best not to cry. Like he did not want to seem weak in front of everyone for a second time. Despite that, the adult knew very much. Preparations were made immediately. They held a small memorial ceremony the same day for the young, brave, courageous woman known as Yuka. Frankie had built a coffin for the woman, giving a casket fit for a noble or a queen. They had only recently known her, but each member of the crew had something nice to say about the woman. The only ones who could or would not speak were the children. Most of the men carried the coffin off the ship with everyone else following behind them. All the while, Brook played a beautiful yet sad tune on his violin in honor of Yuka. From the Thousand Sunny, the group walked to a spot they had picked. It was a nice spot on a cliff just a half a mile away. Once they reached the exact spot, the men dug up the hole and buried the coffin in Yuka. After finishing the burial, Frankie placed a white stone marker at the head of the grave. So that anyone and everyone would know there was someone buried here and that she deserved their honor and respect. The head marker read, "Here lies Yuka, generous of heart, constant of faith. Friend of the Straw Hat Pirates, devoted mother, and a courageous woman. Until we meet again." Even after everything was said and done, the whole crew and the children stayed before the grave in silence. They stood there for many minutes until eventually the Straw Hats felt like it was time to leave. The Straw Hats began heading back to the Thousand Sunny, but they noticed that Akio wasn't moving from his spot. Immediately, Nami walked back over attempting to talk to the boy. Akio," the boy didn't respond, so she continued. We were thinking that you could stay with us for a bit until." "Away," Akio said quietly with his head held low. Nami hummed, unable to hear the boy clearly. Akio clenched his teeth with anger. He lifted his head up and glared at the woman angrily and hurt, though also shedding tears. He shouted loudly, "Go away." Nami leaned back, caught by surprise by the boy's attitude. Before she could even respond to it, she watched as the boy took off into the forest. Akio," she tried calling out in an attempt to stop the boy. Unfortunately, he did not listen and the boy disappeared into the forest. The crew had heard the boy's shout and immediately stopped to look back. They were surprised as well when the boy took off into the woods. "Nami?" spoke Usopp, confused. "What happened?" asked Zoro. Nami started saying, looking both sad and confused. "I was just telling him he could stay with us for a little bit." "The poor boy," Robin said sadly. "He's probably emotional and mentally unstable after everything that happened so far." Chopper gasped as a thought came to his mind. "You don't think he'll do something to hurt himself?" Robin closed her eyes, finding the idea unpleasant. "I hope not," she replied back. "I can relate to the young boy's instability." Brook spoke, sounding sad and distant. It had taken myself a long time for me to recover after the loss of my old crew. But you recovered? Sanji stated to clarify. Yes, but it was hard. The memories of my old crew and promise to return to Laboon are what kept me going through that dismal fog and haunted waters. But I fear that young Akio doesn't have the same fortitude that I, an adult and pirate, have. He shouldn't be left alone. I agree, Nami said as she walked back to crew. We need to find him. Mama. Mika said, speaking up. Daddy left already. What? Shouted most of the crew, surprised. They all looked back to find their captain missing from his spot. Where the hell did he go? Shouted Zoro, annoyed. Immediately, a shoe hit the back of Zoro's head. Ow. Watch your mouth around Mika, Nami said, scolding the man. Zoro replied back with a low growl, but refrained from saying anything further. Where did Daddy? Mika asked, confused. Frankie looked over at the forest. You don't think he already went after Akio? Probably, Nami replied, sounding sure. We should probably go out and find them then, Sanji said with some disdain, though mostly towards having to find their silly captain. No, Nami said, surprising everyone. Luffy's got this. Robin looked at Nami curiously. She immediately asked, why do you say that? Because he knows how Akio feels right now. He lost his mother a similar way. The most of the crew looked at Nami, stunned. What? Many of them said, with the exception of Zoro and Robin. They were still just as startled by this fact, especially Robin. He told me about it the day before, Nami said as she held her arm uncomfortably. Daddy's mama too, Mika said sadly. Yes, sweetie, a long time ago when he was only a little younger than you. Several years ago, up on a certain mountain during a blizzard in winter, a lone figure was trudging through the snow. This light pink coat-wearing person held their body close, trying to keep warm. The person's face was covered with a cloth to help with keeping warm as well. Unfortunately, none of it seemed to be working much as the person still shivered with cold. As the person kept walking, the person spoke, sounding determined and fearless. I gotta find it, the person, now identified as a woman from her voice, said before looking around. I need to find it, the woman continued to slowly walk forward. This was clearly a woman on a mission, but what that mission was unclear. As the woman moved further up the mountain, she had unknowingly attracted some unwanted attention. With a paw crashing through the snow, a large bear was trudging towards the woman with a fierce and hungry gaze. As it got closer, it let out a roar. The woman heard the roar over the howling wind and turned around to see the bear. It stood nearly 3 times her size as he stood before her. It looked wild and cruel as its piercing red eyes stared down at its next victim. Any person would be afraid, yet the woman looked only annoyed in seeing the animal. I don't have time for this, the woman said loudly as she turned her fully towards the beast. She held her arms and fists out as she glared threateningly at the bear. He needs medicine. The bear released a roar as it raised his paw about to attack. The woman didn't look afraid of the beast. In fact, she looked ready to fight it. As the bear swung its paw, the woman charged straight at the bear fearlessly. She was determined to win. I won't let Luffy down. Meanwhile, down in Fuchsia village on the outskirts of the small village, a lone house stood by itself on the edge of the forest in the shadow of the mountain the brave young woman was on. While it seemed like a blizzard on the mountain, at the village it was only snowing lightly. Inside the lone building, 2 adults were looking after a sick child. They were Whoop Slap and Makino, both looking much younger than they would be in present time, and they were both trying to help the young 4-year-old Luffy with his illness. The poor child was red with fever and breathing hoarsely. This is the story before the story. Before the Straw Hat. This is the story of, not the man, but the woman that raised the boy who would become infamously known as Straw Hat. Luffy. A story that would forever impact the life of a young boy and leave a scar on his heart. This is the story of Monkey D. Luffy's mother, Monkey D. Star.